episode 197 of the Warhammer Podcast, known as Look Out Sir. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce you to this, our lovely little podcast about all things Warhammer 40,000, Warhammer Age of Sigmar, Warhammer the Old World, Warhammer the Horus Heresy, and who knows what else. It is, of course, us, me, Dan, and Phil. How you doing, Phil?
Hello. I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right, mate. Doing not too bad, thank you very much. The world is treating me well this weekend in particular. I'm going to be down in Bournemouth yet again for Beachhead. So looking forward to judging Warhammer 40,000 players as they play many games of the aforementioned Warhammer 40,000. So hopefully we will run the event smoothly and not have any controversy or silly nonsense, although it is Warhammer 40,000, so it is only inevitable that there will be some very, very small internet drama following it. No doubt some undeserving individual will win, or someone will push their models around unnecessarily. But it will be streamed. It will be streaming right now when this comes out. I can't remember who's streaming it because I'm not that well organised. But if you happen to be listening to this the day it comes out and are, able to get yourself over to Twitch and surf around looking for competitive Warhammer 40,000 content, I am under the impression that someone is streaming it. I guess I'll post about it on my Instagram or something. But yeah, there you go. Plug for the thing that I'm doing right now when this episode is available. Exciting, eh? Yeah, I guess if the 4+ hours of us talking isn't enough and you need even more 40k content, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Or you happen to be in Bournemouth near the Bic and you want to come and, stab me up, head on over.
No, I don't want to do that, Dan.
No, I know you don't, but someone out there might, and, it could be a perfectly good opportunity for him. And if it is the way that I should meet my end, it has been a delight to do this podcast, and I hope that you all remember me fondly. Well, more fondly, obviously, than the individual who chose to stab me to death.
Well, that person is contractually obliged to replace you on the show and do all the editing, so I don't have to. That is the deal we can make.
I worry that might be an incentive for some especially crazed person where they're like, I've always wanted to present the Look Out Sir podcast.
Winner takes all, Dan. The strongest survive. I suggest, you've been going down to the gym lately. You can take them on, I believe.
I mean, it's very bold of you to say. The problem is with going to the gym is all that really happens to you is you just become increasingly sore. That's essentially what your life becomes.
You can squat that assailant on your back.
I could, absolutely. I'm making good progress on that side of things, though. It's going well. I'm happy with the way that's going. But again, ultimately, it's more to do with, I think it was when our good buddy from the Liam Dempsey channel, Joe, got the gout that I was like, you know what? I don't much fancy having gout. I'm gonna do something about that.
No one wants a bit of Nurgle's rot.
No, absolutely. Well, poor old Joe has it in spades, but, there you go. You'll not have to stab him to death because his body will kill him before anyone else does. Poor old Joe. We'll miss him when he's gone.
That we will.
Exactly. Well, hopefully he's got at least another 10 years left in him. I reckon he'll get into his, late 40s at least.
Okay.
What's in this episode, Phil?
So we are talking about two things. We did a little trip up to Warhammer World with the other Look Out Sir people. So we had a Richard with us. We had a Sean with us. We didn't have a Tim, and Joe isn't a thing anymore. So he is a thing, but not with us, sadly. So he didn't come either. So yes, we went up to Warhammer World. We played some Age of Sigmar doubles. So we're recapping our time. Recounting our time at that, and then we did another little topic where we were talking about the diversification of the model lines within Warhammer amongst all the different game systems. So, you might have been noticing your Leviathans are only available in Horus Heresy now and not 40k. Why is that, Dan? Why?
I mean, I don't know for certain, but I spent an hour and a half speculating about it, so there you are.
Exactly. If you want to find out, listen to the rest of the show.
Well, if you want to find out what we assume based on limited information...
Our best guess.
Yeah, exactly, our best guess. That's what you can expect from us there. But not before you, of course, have enjoyed this 5-star review.
Come on now, Timmy. You've got your orders. You've got to do it.
But I don't want to, sir.
You've got your orders. Now get up there, get over that trench, and get me that 5-star review, and get it back here right away.
Okay, sir.
On this occasion, Phil, the 5-star review has come via what method or delivery system, I suppose?
It is the Apple Podcast of the Americas.
Way! Almost certainly given away by me trying to work out whether that was an American date or a British date. You know, that was probably a clue that I shouldn't have given away so frivolously.
What clue was that?
Well, that was me. When I was looking at it, I said, oh, God, I need to work out, is that how the Americans do dates? Because they'd put the month before the day.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear that at all, so that was...
But your brain did.
I don't believe it.
Did.
I don't believe it.
I believe it.
That was a correct guess. I'm
I agree.
not having it taken away from me.
You were not having it taken away from you, but I Darren Browned it into your brain, I'm telling you. That's how it went. I used the old psychological warfare on you there. But anyway, yes, so no. This episode's 5-star review comes via an individual named Chog244, who has sent Why I Love Your Podcast 5 stars, which is, of course, a prerequisite of appearing here in the 5-star review segment. We thank everyone who has given us a 5-star review, and we do so by reading it out in this segment. And if you would like to be one of those individuals that has their 5-star review read out on Lookout Sir, the Warhammer Podcast, you need only leave us a 5-star review in the places where you could do that, which include, in this instance, iTunes, but could also be Audible, could be Facebook, for example. You could even chuck it in our YouTube comments, but we ignore those because they don't help us algorithmically, and we are soulless corporate shills who ultimately only want our own self-aggrandization as a result of, things that give us greater reach and things. Anyway, point is, thank you to everyone who's left us a 5-star review. Please consider doing the same. You are the best, but not as good as who, Phil?
The people that support us over on the Patrons, you can support us over on there for as little as, I want to say, £3 a month or $3, something like that. But you can pay whatever you want. So if you've got some big bucks that you want to throw our way, you could also do that if you are so inclined. Literally, no one's ever done that. We always get a £3 donation every month.
Not that we look down upon that. We love it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it would be mad if someone gave us anything more than that, really. I genuinely, humbly, really appreciate everyone who supports the podcast. I think it's amazing. And, really, we don't do very much to deserve that, although we do put out many hours of content and blah, blah, blah. But seemingly we're doing that anyway. So for the people who are, taking it upon themselves to support us, I really appreciate you. And thank you very much for doing it. And if you'd like to be among them, why not consider doing so? But only if you can afford it. At the end of the day, we're going to keep doing this, whether you're supporting us on Patreon or not. But it does mean the world to us that you do, or the people that do. So thank you to our patrons. You are the best. What was the last thing?
Merch. Buy our merch.
Thank you, yes. Buy our merch. Links in the description. Blah, 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 blah. One day we'll do a new design, but we probably won't because we're lazy. Which is kind of the, I say we're lazy, we put this stuff out, but we've got too much other stuff going on, at the moment. Life is a mad old thing, isn't it, Phil?
Exactly.
I mean, poor old Phil had to spend the whole weekend, shipping out random bits that he's been, printing in, vast quantities for his Beyond the Tabletop business. He's
not printing. I've been casting.
Sorry, casting.
I'm not one of those printer bros, Dan. Had a...
No, I apologise. But you broke your compressor, didn't you? You got to buy a new compressor.
No, I do, yeah. Well, I say it broke. It rusted itself because I didn't drain it like I'm told to on the... I don't know. There wasn't an instruction manual, or if there was, I didn't read it.
Yeah,
but apparently you're meant to drain them.
Well, there you go. So if loads of you could buy T-shirts, Phil could get a new compressor. That's how that works, right?
Yes, although our
margins aren't
our margins on the T-shirts aren't great. I think we'd have to sell about 200.
Well, there we go. If someone wants to buy 200 T-shirts, that would do Phil a real solid there. So that was all of that. Let's get back to the 5-star review, which comes via Chog244. Why I love your podcast, 5 stars. I love all your content and your great sense of humour. I mean, it is a great sense of humour, isn't it, Phil?
I mean, you did joke about you being stabbed to death earlier, so I'm not sure it's that great. It's a bit
Well,
much.
It is a joke for now until it becomes reality, and it takes on a whole new grim sort of reality, doesn't it?
No, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine this being played in retrospect, It would definitely, I'm sure my wife would find it very comforting.
You would have Nosferatu'd it, which is a reference to an earlier episode.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Or the recent movie.
I mean, it could have worked for that, which is why I put in as a reference to an older episode.
Oh, fine. Anyway, yes. So I love your sense of humour, or your great sense of humour. I especially love your Astra Militarum content, and I listen to them over and over, Phil. They are listening to your Astra Militarum. What that tells me is this individual likes that one episode where you and Toke talk about Krieg. That's basically what it is.
Obsessive.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you, Chog244. You are a scholar and a saint, and we doff our cap in your general direction. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you for enjoying our Astra Militarum content. And good news! More on the way. Not episode 198, but episode 199 will almost certainly have Astra Militarum on it, because they've just gone out or said they're going on pre-order this week, aren't they?
Yes, pre-order this week, so at least 2 weeks away. So yeah, should be that episode, yeah.
There you go. It's coming soon for your listening pleasure. Another episode to put on repeat. Maybe we should get Token again.
Mate, well, he probably plays the army more than I do at the moment, so that might be a good thing.
Let's ask him. Let's get him on. Joe plays the army a whole bunch, but I mean, we could invite him, but he wouldn't turn up.
Is he too busy having gout?
He's too busy having gout. He never.
Is he over it? Is he recovered?
No, you don't get over gout.
Oh, you just have it.
Yeah, gout's just one of those things that you just have forever.
Oh.
Yeah. There are other more sinister and horrific examples that I could, throw into the mix as kind of points of comparison, but I won't do it out of respect for the people who are suffering with those kind of things and not to kind of scare people. But yeah, gout's one of those unfortunate forever things. You always just have to live with it. Like, I'm an asthmatic, Phil, and I have to just deal with that all the time.
And I have to deal with you all the time.
Exactly. And my occasional heavy breathing.
True.
It's terrible. Anyway. Say thank you to Chog244 and we'll get on with the show.
Mr. Chog, thank you for your kind words. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. We're assuming you're a Krieg player. Maybe you're not. Maybe you're just a generic Astra Militarum player. Maybe you're a fan of the Vacadians, however you would like to pronounce it. But glad you're enjoying the show. Glad you find us funny, even though we're deeply, deeply unfunny and we take things far too seriously. And so you've got another episode coming up, as Dan had said. Kind of stolen my joke about being able to listen to a new episode on repeat, because that's your thing. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on that future episode.
There we go. Until then, transitional noise. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this part of the podcast where me and Phil are going to have a little bit of a chat about the current affairs, or state of affairs, I should say, of Warhammer, the corporation, their aspirations, thoughts, hopes and dreams as we interpret them, alongside how that is being consumed and enjoyed by us, the dear fan of Warhammer and Warhammer-related accessories. So, effectively, a lot of stuff going on at the moment within the world of Warhammer, not least in regards to many new additions, rules, codexes, things of that nature, but also a general consensus within the community that there's been a lot of loss of late. Many things being taken away, many things changing, many things being updated, or many things being replaced with new things. It's a topsy-turvy, crazy space, and we're just going to have a chat about why we think that might be, and generally kind of pontificate. Is that a word, Phil?
It is, yeah.
There we go. Now we're going to do some of that. I don't know if it relates necessarily to what we're actually doing, but that's the word I chose. But yes, that's what the general vibe of this segment is. Phil, can you succinctly distill the essence of that into some sort of header?
I'm sure I can. Do you want me to do it now, off the top?
Right now, Phil, come on. What is this section all about, Phil?
Why is Games Workshop splitting their model lines in half?
Oh, or even quarters, maybe thirds.
Into their own individual game systems, and there is no cross-pollination between the two unless you happen to probably be knights or custodies, at least for 40k and Heresy. AoS and the Old World are the other sort of fantasy versions that are having a similar split and divide at the moment that we see as the battle tomes are coming out, in the same way that we see it with Heresy and 40k, although a lot of that has already happened, and the plaster has been peeled off with that one.
That's it. I think this is the thing, right? I mean, obviously this is all pure speculation. We haven't got the good fortune of having any kind of insider knowledge as it concerns all this stuff. But it's fair to say that the statement has been made often by ourselves and many others around this kind of current wave of GW releases, 10th edition Warhammer 40,000, 4th edition Age of Sigmar, and the kind of resurgence of Horus Heresy. Not that it really went away, but it has become more of a kind of mainline big product with the release of the 2nd edition, well, technically 3rd edition Horus Heresy that came out a few years ago. I think it was 21, wasn't it? No, 22.
What's the 2nd edition of Heresy?
Well, so the 1st edition of Heresy was based off of Warhammer 40,000's 6th edition. But because of what it was as a kind of general construct, it was more of an expansion pack to the game. Then when it became 7th edition, the expanded content that they had created through the black books and other things kind of augmented along it. But essentially, there was kind of the 1st edition Horus Heresy, which was either 6th edition 40k or 7th edition 40k with black book bolt-ons. And then after 7th edition Warhammer 40,000 had gone out of circulation, a few months, maybe a year later, the Specialist Games team actually created their own bespoke rulebook for Horus Heresy. So that came in between the 2022 release and the removal of 7th edition Warhammer 40,000.
Yeah.
I can't remember officially what it was called. I bought it once and then realised that I was never going to use it. So within the same day that I bought it, went, no, this is just stupid, and gave it back. So returned it on the very same day at Warhammer World.
I do remember them doing that, come to think of about it. Because I remember distinctly they did the red books, which were the army specific books. And I don't know if they came before or alongside that one. I think they came before.
Yeah, but again, I think they reissued new red books to go along with that as well. But I think that's the thing. So I think, yeah, because there were the black books, which were obviously the epic tomes, and then they did the... Anyway, we've already... Look at us now. Well, we have one topic to talk about. Now we're trying to dissect what the history of Heresy is. The point is there have been more than one edition of Heresy. Could have been 3, could have been 4, depending on how you interpret the various variables. But the point is that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on now that Heresy has kind of become, I guess, more kind of linked to this kind of annualized 3 yearly cycle, which is heavily rumored to be the case, as we're expecting a new edition of Heresy this year. There's talk that there could be a new edition of Old World as soon as next year as well, which would mean that was potentially moving into like a 2-year cycle, which would be absolutely wild. But obviously Old World has come to pass, and there now seems to be this sort of need for GW to kind of isolate and distinguish their 4 kind of major IP pillars, if you will. So essentially you've got the Warhammer Old World, you've got the Age of Sigmar, you've got Warhammer Horus Heresy, and then you have Warhammer 40,000. And then obviously within that, you've also got other games like Blood Bowl, Adeptus Titanicus, Legions Imperialis, Blood Bowl, I said already, Necromunda, even Warcry.
Warcry, Underworlds.
Yeah.
Get it? I mean, technically the one that doesn't fit under that category, which is its own, evil stepchild, which is Battle for Middle-earth, because that is its own separate IP. But in this context, it is isolating. It's its own thing, living in its own little world. So can't really be discussed in the same way. My knowledge on that game system is really, really bad. I played it when it first came out in like the 2000s because it was the thing to do, because it was the new GW product and Lord of the Rings was super cool. But I didn't really play it for more than a couple of years and in a very sparing way. And I've really lost all sense of what goes on with that game. But it seems like every time you look at it,
it's got a new face. Like at the moment, it's all War of the Rohirrim stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, is that a whole new thing, or is it just the same thing with a facelift? Because they did the same during the Hobbit era. They just seem to consistently just kind of attach the latest film IP and just go, that's that now.
Yeah, I almost assume it's like a named edition in a way. And as you say, it is either a bolt-on or an expansion, but often re-released. To be fair, it comes across as much like Necromunda. Necromunda has only technically it's had 2 editions, right? It's had the very original 90s release, and then it had the, I want to say 2013-14 one, which was Underhive. And then since then, everything's been an expansion, technically. But I think each of those boxes has had its own name. You've had Ash Waste, you've had the newest one that came out last year. They are really almost editions of the game under that branding, but the core mechanics haven't ever really changed, so they are all compatible with each other. And I think much like Battle for Middle-earth, it's just a branding exercise in terms of those naming conventions.
Yeah, indeed. I remember, anyway, we're going to go off on another tangent here, but yeah, the point is that, yeah, there's a bunch of different stuff. Again, Lord of the Rings sits in its own space, or Hobbit, or War of the Rohirrim. The Middle-earth stuff is its own thing. And then technically Blood Bowl's its own thing as well, because it's sort of an alternate fantasy universe where in place of pitch battles, they settle their battles on the pitch, which is totally fair enough. So, that's super fun. But yeah, look, the long story short is we're probably going to focus the conversation around those 4 key kind of overarching games: Heresy, 40k, AoS, and Old World, and just have a conversation about what's going on with that, what's the vibe, how we feel like it's impacting the player base, and what it's kind of creating. Because I think, ultimately, myself and Phil, we're definitely hobby butterflies. We've definitely got a passion and enthusiasm and a desire to play the greater majority of things, right? Like, right now, Phil, you have an extensive collection of old-timey-wimey Chaos Dwarves that you are attempting to build and paint, and ultimately debating whether you should put them on the old bases so as they are era appropriate, or whether you build for Old World, accepting that, who knows where the future lies for Chaos Dwarfs in that particular game system. Will they get a re-release? Who knows, right? But the point is you're dabbling with that. You've obviously got your various 40k forces. You've also now got your Thunder Warriors that you intend to also use for Heresy. You've got your extensive Krieg army, which can obviously be used in Heresy as well in a militia form. Yep. So you've got that side of things. And also, you also play AoS as well. I myself do similar things, but with much less kind of hobby gumption than your good self, I would say. I've bought a lot of things, and I have, high hopes that at some point in the future they will manifest into playable armies. That just hasn't completely occurred yet, at least not in all instances, I suppose.
That's fair. Yeah, we all have aspirations to play all 4 of those systems to various degrees of success, probably.
That's it. So that's what we're sort of saying, right? Like, without wanting to kind of self-aggrandize or laud ourselves too much, we are people who are exposed and attempt to play the greater majority of systems, and we are quite kind of system agnostic, even though we are probably ourselves more 40k and AoS centric these days. But yeah, that's the general vibe, just to kind of predicate this particular conversation. So yeah, I guess the most recent or most kind of prevalent event that occurred that really kind of created more conversations and more awareness of these kind of changes in GW ethos were definitely the arrival of Old World and how that whole process was treated, and then the subsequent release of Age of Sigmar and how that was directly impacted by the prior Old World release. So for context, and I swear I will let Phil talk in a second, for context, Old World released, and effectively it had a lot of miniatures within its range that were still also being used in Age of Sigmar. It also had a number of ranges that players have played, collected and enjoyed for years that sat in their kind of legends category. So they essentially went, we know that people want to play their Chaos Dwarfs armies. We know that people want to play their Dark Elf armies, but for various reasons, we're not in a place to support those. So they're going to sit in this nebulous kind of unofficial status, despite the fact that they have as detailed a selection of rules as any of the main factions, which was a very interesting decision on their part. So that was initially very interesting for the old world players, because a lot of them had some initial frustrations in terms of how that was going to be managed and what that meant for them long term. And then obviously the kicker from that was then what happened in AoS 4, when the announce of AoS 4 basically came with two very big caveats in the form of Beastmen and Bone Splitter Orcs, both basically being, foretold to be leaving the realms, as well as obviously large amounts of Stormcast Eternals going into Legends or basically being removed from the game altogether. Stormcast are linked to a different thing, which we'll talk about separately. But Phil, what do you think the vibe was following all of that, and how did you think they handled it, and what do you think, mate? In context of Old World / AoS 2024 shenanigans.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a mixed bag. I think people could see why those things were happening. So a lot of the Old World armies that were in Legends, like Chaos, Vampire Counts, Chaos Dwarves, Vampire Counts, as you said, Dark Elves, Lizard Men, I think, and Skaven. I think that was most of them.
Skaven, I think, was amongst their Legends selection. I think there was one more, but anyway, it's a moot point.
But basically, a lot of those have very heavy model ranges that existed in Age of Sigmar using those old Warhammer Fantasy models. Because obviously, when Warhammer Fantasy ended and Age of Sigmar 1 appeared, all of those models, with the exception of New Stormcast, off the bat were old existing fantasy models being rebased into Age of Sigmar. And even to this day, that was the case for many factions. So Cities of Sigmar still have a lot of the old dwarves and Dark Elf minis. Cities of Sigmar also had all the old Empire models until the Ranger refresh that happened maybe a year or so ago. And they got gorgeous new sculpts. Skaven, again, only just recently had, with AoS 4, a whole brand new refreshed army. Up until then, they were literally all using the old fantasy models for the lion's share, with the exception of, like, the odd Underworld warband and I think one character. Like, very heavily over-indexing in the old fantasy models. So I think it was fair to assume, like, oh, this is the reason why. And same with, like, Lizard Men and stuff like that. So with the exception, I think, potentially of Chaos Dwarfs that don't exist in Age of Sigmar, although there's lots of obviously heavy rumours that they are coming as a faction. They've sort of been teased a lot in the background, in maps. In the latest preview, there was a lot of speculation that the teaser at the end was for Chaos Dwarves. So if that is the case, that might lean into why they also don't want to bring them back into the old world, potentially, because it does feel like, as you said, they want to have this clear distinction between those factions that could have crossover between the two systems. And they ideally seem to not want you to buy a model in one and use it in the other, or potentially buy an army in one game and use it in the other. And, the progenitor of that always seems like it was Chaos Demons, because you could use them in 40k, you could use them in Age of Sigmar, you could, I guess, technically use them in bits of Heresy as well. So
you can use them in Heresy, yeah.
Although with that one, it was like, oh yeah, you can use those models to represent the things that they're meant to be, but, it wasn't a complete like-for-like thing. They weren't like just called, Plague Bearers. They were like lesser demons of something or other, and you could represent them with your Plague Bearers, for example.
Yeah, I think it was similar to the rules around Imperial Militia, or just militia in the general sense, in so much as it was like a catch-all term
Yes.
for generic guardsmen, and they utilize a lot of the same equipment, gear, and kind of unit compositions, but ultimately were kind of something different. But again, I'm no expert when it comes to demons in heresy specifically now anyway. But I know historically they were very well supported, but yeah, I'm not entirely confident with how they're supported.
They're
They're a PDF.
They're a PDF at the moment with lots of designer commentary saying represent them however you want, but just be consistent. So if you're using a particular model to represent one unit, you can't use those models to represent another unit as well. Things like that, which does make perfect sense. But going back to the initial AoS 4, obviously, if you're a Beastman player, you're going to be really gutted, or Bone Splitters, but I felt like those were very underrepresented and not very well supported armies anyway. Not to, not to belittle people's feelings that have those armies that are suddenly not going to have them playable anymore in Age of Sigmar. That's obviously an awful, horrible thing. They obviously do happen from time to time, and it's a bit rubbish when it does. But
it's really rubbish, to be fair. I think it sucks, but the thing is you've just kind of, you get used to the fact that this is how GW work, right? Because they're just constantly invested in the idea of churning things and keeping people spending,
There is something to be said about like new models and new releases is like Games Workshop's focus in terms of getting people to buy whatever's new, and it's less about supporting the existing armies. But obviously that also needs to happen, right? But the whole news cycle is always about the new models and things like that.
Well, it's interesting, and we can get into this. I think that there is a kind of looming conversation that is obviously needed to be had, and we'll get into it in a moment. But yeah, when it comes to removal of armies and change, it does feel like it is driven by a couple of factors. But it seems like more than anything, it's a business need to either kind of carve out and establish particular intellectual property around particular games. So the idea being that, beastmen in the world of Warhammer the Old World are a specific type of faction with a specific kind of lore. And with the way the range is and what they're looking at, there was no desire to kind of do an Age of Sigmar equivalent, or if there is, that's going to be far off and something they revisit when they have capacity to do so. But it made more sense to kind of, keep that range within the aesthetic of Old World, because that's kind of where it predominantly sits anyway. And if it is that down the pipeline, if it is 3 years from now that they go, oh, Age of Sigmar, here's Beastmen again, obviously that's going to be exciting, but the aspiration will be that, hopefully people who had Beastmen before, who maybe still have old Beastmen, will be incentivized to buy the new ones because they are different, interesting ways, which kind of alludes to the conversation that I'm stating that we'll have in a moment. But I think that's the other thing as well, which I've heard said many times, which is also how Games Workshop, the corporate entity, recognizes success within its different studio groups. And I have heard that there is this thing where a lot of the success of Old World was somewhat unfairly, or again, fairness is, I suppose, objective, but ultimately, or quite obscure almost, but ultimately it seemed like because many of the miniature ranges that were seeing uplifts in sales as a result of the release of the Old World were attributed in a back-end kind of finance sense to the Age of Sigmar IP. Obviously the AoS team were probably enjoying a great deal of praise because all of a sudden their ranges are selling extraordinarily well, but not because of anything they were doing directly, but just by virtue of the weird way that these things are recognized. And I think from a business perspective, I think they do just want to get to a point where they are able to track and understand how, their products are performing relative to the game systems that they represent. So ultimately, these ranges are distinctly Old World, these ranges are distinctly 40k, and there is no opportunity for those things to be, cross-pollinated. They're their own things in their own world.
I logically that should make sense. However, I think on a practical level, it doesn't at all.
No, I don't disagree.
And there's several reasons for that. So the Age of Sigmar Seraphon, gorgeous models that
Great
you
models.
could easily build them, buy and build those models and put them on square bases and run them as lizard men from the old world using the legacy PDF. Games Workshop technically has no idea that that sale is really for the old world. However, you can have, like the Empire and Cities of Sigmar, two distinct model ranges in terms of their look and feel because they have diversified them, stylistically. But, so if you're technically buying the Empire for the old world, you're more likely to buy the old fantasy models, but there is nothing stopping you buying, the Cities of Sigmar range and kind of converting them, to make the units compatible, even though they might not have like for like comparisons.
And I totally agree with that statement. And perhaps I didn't phrase it correctly because what I'm saying is that's what is happening, as well. And I think, again, I think you're right. Like, there's plenty of people out there that are doing that and were doing that because they wanted to get into playing Old World, right? So a lot of people will have bought Seraphon to rep as Lizardmen. A lot of people will have bought Cities of Sigmar. A lot of people would have bought, Lumineth Realm Lords, for High Elves, etc. That will have happened. What I'm saying is that I think what they're trying to do, though, is get to a point where, in the general sense, they have distinct ranges that are for those specific games. Yeah. And I think across the bulk of their kind of portfolio, because again, on a granular one-to-one basis, yes, there will be maybe 1 in 100 sales of a specific kit will be someone buying it to use it for some other function. But the overarching majority of people are getting it for the reason that it is being sold for, i.e., most people who are buying High Elf Spearmen will be buying them to play or collect for use in Warhammer the Old World. There may be the odd person who's buying High Elf Spearmen to convert into a guard regiment, but I imagine the general consensus is that 99% of the sale of that kit will be attributed to that thing. And again, I don't necessarily feel like it even matters necessarily what the use of that kit is. It's just more a case of understanding what the ranges are in isolation and then being able to pinpoint particular upticks and performance increases. Because if some set of rules occur or change within Old World that sees a drastic increase in sales of a specific army, as a business, GW has a number of different kind of data points that they can put against. So if they see that High Elf Spearmen have a 10x increase in sale through because of a rules change, it's very evident why that was. But then weirdly, I suppose, say for example, the team at Old World all of a sudden see a 10x increase in Spearman sales and they're like, where's that come from? And it turns out that, the Age of Sigmar team did a thing that made that more valuable. Oh, I get it. Okay, fine. But then it's a bit more of a kind of, the causality isn't quite as well understood. But again, that speaks more, I suppose, to the presumed fragmented nature of Games Workshop and how they operate. And again, that's heavily rumoured, but not something I've personally experienced because I don't work there. I don't know anything about it other than what people say about it. But yeah, what I was trying to say is I think, like, on the whole, I think it just makes sense that they're looking at it from that perspective as a business perspective. I think it's linked to IP. I also think it's just linked to their kind of sales metrics and other things that they're trying to track and understand.
I can totally understand that, but at the same time, not allowing, and this is maybe more 40k and heresy specific because there's sort of precedent set from before. Before, every single heresy vehicle was playable in 40k. Correct. Until the start of this edition when they were like, no, you can't do that anymore. And it's just going to Legends.
Did you see, though, Phil? Did you see what stayed in the Guard Codex?
Yes, apparently the Cyclops, and which I have, the Avenger Strike Fighter, which I also have, and that's it.
That's it.
Apparently, which is
yeah, so weird.
Which is an odd choice. One, because the Cyclops feels like it's sort of been replaced by the weird combat engineer mind thing, because that is how I would just represent it with my army. And then, out of the 3 fighters that they've just kept the Avenger Strike Fighter, odd that that's in there. Weirdly, again, the Arvus Lighter is ironically now in plastic, but then that's not in there either. Which is a shame, because often the majority of these things have happened only after, or very shortly after, they moved to plastic. So the Contemptor and the Leviathan went to plastic. Hundreds, if not thousands, of Space Marine players went out and bought them for their 40k specific armies, and then 6 months later were told, oh yeah, these aren't usable anymore. They're going to Legends, which is a real shame. So it's very anti-consumer practices, but I can understand it from a bookkeeping point of view that's if the game systems are siloed off, and that Games Workshop wants to do like performance reviews or whatever based on sales, that makes more sense, although it just is a worse value proposition. And it also sort of doesn't make sense from the point of view of, if you don't play Heresy but you have an opportunity to buy all these Heresy vehicles, that is a sale that Games Workshop is just losing out on now, because no 40k players are buying those things anymore unless they can somehow convert them or represent them in some way in 40k via a data sheet. So you could go, Contemptor, I could just run as the generic Dreadnought data sheet, because that's currently still in there but might not be in there for long. But, other things get a bit harder. And in a weird way, jumping back to AoS, they tend not to, now I'm not sure this is 100% correct, but they tend not to just remove something from the game. It feels like it gets replaced with a near identical unit with a different name. And to be fair, 40k does that occasionally when it updates its units. But
40k's been doing it for a long time now, and that was going to be my particular topic that I was alluding to earlier, which is I feel like Games Workshop have been massively influenced by the Primaris release. I think Games Workshop have looked at Primaris and they've gone, right, what did we do there? We took something extraordinarily popular in Space Marines and we completely reinvented them, but they were somehow still Space Marines. And what we did is we created a situation where we sold ice to Eskimos. We basically had a bunch of Space Marine players and then somehow, some way convinced thousands of Space Marine players with fully functioning Space Marine armies to rebuy their armies. And the way we did it was we basically went, oh yeah, this isn't a tactical squad, it's an intercessor squad. Okay, cool. So what does that mean? Well, it's basically a tactical squad. However, it's not. It's an intercessor squad. And people went, ooh, give me them intercessors. Now, it didn't hurt that they released beautiful miniatures, but that I feel like has underpinned a lot of their thinking when it comes to these refresh ideas. And they basically worked out that essentially you, Phil, have a Krieg army, and you have grenadiers, and you have engineers, and you have, infantry, and you have horses, or more specifically, clawed legion horses. Death Riders, yes, thank you. But the way they went with that was that we could give you a kit that is basically an engineer, but a new kit so you could continue using your old kit. But what if we gave you an entirely new thing, which is kind of the same as what you already have, but slightly different, almost like a Primaris Intercessor squad? Maybe you'll buy that as well. And I think that's the thing. I think the Primaris range really kind of kick-started this. And I think where we are today is kind of like living with the impact of those 6-7 years of Primaris Marines and the impact that it's had on their entire business, because basically what they've realized is that they can take something and repackage it, rename it, and resell it to you, right? It's like when Coke brought back classic Coke. And to be fair as well, right? That's on the cards as well, right? Like eventually, when we're all sick of Primaris Marines, they're going to come along and go, classic Marines, anyone? And you're going to go, yeah! God damn, I love Mark 9! Woo! And it's just going to be like...
Well, Mark
it's going to be all that
7,
again.
right? But, yeah.
Oh yeah, but what I'm saying, because they did the Mark X, didn't they? But they left that.
They left Mark 9 as a potential for a new old style Marine. Yes, yeah. You are right, because I remember specifically with the Tyranid range refresh, there were quite a few units that were very similar to old ones, and I think weirdly in the first wave at least, the old ones weren't being touched a lot of the time, and it's like, here's a new unit that's very similar to an existing one, but given a slightly different name, and does something quite similar, but not exactly the same. And as you say, the
neural boards or whatever they were.
Yeah, and the combat engineers are sort of similar. Whereas, like with AoS, it feels a bit more like for like as an update. So you've got the new, you've got the existing Graveguard models that they previewed at the LVO, but they're now called Barrow Guard. So they've given them their own unique name, which I think is in part to differentiate it from the fantasy model line. So the fantasy stuff can go back, and they've updated obviously the sculpts, and they look all great. But they look like they're the old ones. The old ones can still run as the new ones. Maybe they probably need to be rebased. But ultimately, that's a very like-for-like comparison. And they've done that a lot with 40k, to be fair. Like, Eldari haven't really changed. They haven't given you different units of striking scorpions, or any of that. That you know, I think the bikes is the only one where they've given you new units. But other than that, everything else is a one-for-one replica. They haven't changed the names of anything. And I don't know if maybe that's, you know, the sacred holy cow of Games Workshop, because the people that created that army still work there and probably still heavily invested in it. They wouldn't agree with any kind of change. But, you know, maybe in the future that either will happen, or maybe we'll start to see new units come down the line for them. It's odd that it does seem like it's a tactic that they've done for some things, but not for everything.
Well, that's it, isn't it? And I agree with what you said about Elder, in so much as obviously Jez is still there, and he, you know, kind of spearheaded those, and maybe to him he's kind of unable to kind of reimagine what a striking scorpion is, or reimagine what because again, the thing is with Eldari, within the kind of fluff, and again, this is all stuff that design team are very integral in, so I understand why that doesn't necessarily get that Marine treatment, or even the Krieg treatment, or the Cadia treatment. They did it with them. They didn't just become standard infantry. They became shock troopers. You know, all this stuff is kind of very consistent with what they're doing. But again, it sort of speaks to that need to kind of update and up-res and upsell you on these things. Because here's the thing, right? I've played Warhammer 40,000 for a long time. I started playing in 1997, Phil. 1997. So what's that now? 28 years ago. So I will say this, in 22 of those 28 years, I could probably have gotten away with using more or less the same Space Marine army across those 22 years. Like for 22 years, every time they did a new Space Marine thing, they go, oh, here's a new thing. Like, for example, from second to third, they went, here's a new land speeder kit, here's a new tactical squad kit, here's a few things. To be honest with you, second or third edition, I don't even really think we got anything massively new in the Marine book in that edition. I think they just gave us new sculpts for the old stuff. And then in fourth edition, they went, here's some metals for Vanguard and Stern Guard. And then in fifth, they went, here's a drop pod, here's some new dreadnoughts. Anyway, I'm not going to go through every flipping Space Marine change, but they basically went, here's one new thing, two new things, but it's still Space Marines. And you could have basically, for those first 22 years that I played the game, I could have had the same Space Marine army and just bolted stuff onto it for that whole time.
Well, yeah, because
it wasn't.
Gone.
Yeah.
No,
please.
Well, I was going to say that it's a testament to Games Workshop, like release rates, churn rate of how much they pump out as new models in a given year. Like, it's insane how much they do.
Oh yeah,
and it used to be, back in those days, you would be lucky to get one or two new kits for your faction in a given year at best. Whereas now it's almost like you obviously probably get a character model each year, or at least each edition, when the codex comes out. But there's a good chance you'll get a complete range refresh where they will drop between 3 to 6 or 7 new kits for your desired faction. And some of those might be completely brand new. Some of those might be redoing older ones, but they just sort of chuck them at you in a big drop, which is it's very impressive. Is obviously a lot to deal with if you want to buy it all, because it's quite expensive stuff. Some of it might be in a start collecting type thing, combat patrol. Some of it might not be. And they're doing that constantly. Pretty much every month you're getting several of those, it seems like, especially at least this time of year, because obviously you've had Krieg, you've had Elder, you've got the Git mobs for AoS, and then you've got the Soulblight Gravelord stuff coming. So that's four quite huge releases for only 2 of the systems. And obviously that's, yes, there's High Elves coming for the Old World. And that is a big drop, although technically it's just obviously all old models, right? So it's not like they've...
Something new.
Well, I think there's like one character, something like that.
A couple of characters, yeah. There's What's-Her-Face with the spear and Geezer with the helmet.
Okay, yeah, so there are some stuff like that. But even so, just producing those models, reboxing them, doing the designs for all of that, that's all coming in a big wave. Heresy, slightly different. You don't really get... Well, actually, I say that. You do still get those big drops, but it's maybe like one a year, because obviously you got Solar Auxilia last year.
And Mechanicum.
And Mechanicum, yeah. Was Solar Auxilia the year before, or did they both come out last year?
They were both last year. And the year before they had Mark 3?
Yes, they've been doing the different marks, so we're likely to get some more marks. I think Crusade one's touted to probably be the next one, it seems.
Oh, cool. I hope so. That'd be amazing.
I think it's likely because we've had a couple of characters in Crusade Armor, and they tend to do the characters tend to be in whatever mark of plastic is coming.
But they had the Rhino, or the vehicle sprue has a Crusade guy on it.
Yes, he's the only one in plastic so far. But I think 1 or 2 of the characters in resin that have come out have been in Crusade Armor. But prior to the... was it the Mark 5? No, Mark 6 Corvus Armor? Or was that Mark 4? No, Mark 6. You had a bunch of characters in that armor first, so they sort of tease it with the characters, it feels like, at least to me, before they then do the plastic stuff. So it's not quite a whole faction specific like drop, because Heresy is more, for Space Marines, it's about the armor style, and then obviously you've got, Solar Auxilia, Adeptus Mechanicum, potentially Custodes in plastic, which would be interesting, especially as we mentioned at the very beginning. Custodes is one of the current armies in 40k that still has access to the Horus Heresy units. And I assume they're given that special privilege because they sell well, and they know they sell really well for 40k. Because 40k Custodes has quite a small model range. And it's a bit weird. I don't feel like it's heavily being propped up by by the Heresy range, but I think the vehicle aspect of it is what sort of propped it up. Like the access to the kind of Contemptor and sort of Leviathan style Custodes dreadnoughts. And then some of the grav tanks are very popular even now within the tournament scene.
They're very strong.
Not even counting just the kind of the casual gamers that really like them. And it was sort of that reason was why I did the Thunder Warriors to be counted as Custodes, because I could do Heresy models and still run those Heresy models in the 40k version. So maybe I'll be undone in the next year or so. If plastic Custodes come, maybe that's when they make that distinction. But then plastic Knights, like the Cerastus Knights, have been around for a while now, and they still have access to Heresy.
For now, yeah. I mean, I think that may change, but I don't know if it will, because it's weird. There's certain holdouts, right? Like Knights, Custodes, they are that kind of get to keep that. And I think that will be the case throughout the rest of this edition. But I do think that, Custodes players who are spending a lot of money on Forge World resin kits, I think there is a very high probability that in the next edition, the next Custodes release, that will no longer be supported.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's really interesting is that right now we've had lots of loss, right? So literally 10th edition Warhammer 40,000 was littered with it. We basically got presented with loads of stuff getting removed straight away. They basically were like, here is all the Marine stuff we're getting rid of. And the truth is, they didn't even tell you the full extent of it. They actually got rid of more than they told you they got rid of. But, obviously what they told you was pretty extensive. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think it's highly probable that in the next edition, almost all firstborn units will just be removed entirely. I'm not entirely sure. I actually don't believe that we will see tactical Marines, devastated Marines, Centurions continue to exist. I think they're gone. I think Flyers are in all probability gone. I think all flavours of Flyers in 40k are probably going to go.
Across the board? Across all of them?
Across the board.
Interesting, because obviously some of them don't have heresy equivalents, because most of them
agreed.
But, so yeah, it would be interesting. Is the game better without Flyers? Potentially, just because of the... And I've said it a bunch of times. The way every army has access to deep strike or some kind of, effectively just deep strike rules, right? You have very little need for flyers or drop pods to transport models on the tabletop because they're just being done via other methods now. And they tend not to be good enough as a gun platform in their own right to sort of justify them on the table. And with the table sizes shrinking since 9th edition, it just hasn't really, they haven't found their footing ever, really. Obviously they can be good sometimes, competitively and stuff like that, but
I think
would be better without them, possibly.
I think with some original game design and some actual creative thinking, I think there could be a place for Flyers. I just don't know. GW have this strange relationship between how they want models on the table to interact in terms of current game design. But I think there are ways you make Flyers interesting and you keep them, but they become more tokens. They become more representative of a rule set. So it's like, I have a flyer, and to represent that, this is the miniature that I have for the flyer. And effectively, the miniature is placed in table quarters to denote its location or its coordinates, but it's loosely placed, much like how Gloomspike Gits players indicate the position of the moon. Right. It's like there's a token, which in this case is represented by this particular type of flyer, and effectively, come up with rules where, it can basically sit in a quadrant a turn, but then after it has sat in that quadrant for that turn, it then flies off the board. So across a 5-turn game, you basically get a flyer to be on the table 3 out of 5 turns, and it has other benefits. So maybe it can give you abilities to reduce the benefits of cover saves. Maybe it gives you improved intel ballistic skill. Maybe it helps you, neutralize effects like stealth, for example. So say if a unit had stealth, but there's a flyer within the quadrant that they occupy, stealth is deactivated because you have eyes in the sky. Those kind of rules that become more interesting rather than I have a flyer and it's just doing donuts around this board.
Yeah, I guess if you were all flyers have to be in hover mode, that thematically could be. But the idea that maybe you do something like a strafing run, I'm sure Bolt Action used to have a similar thing, but you use smaller models to represent them. So it might be on your table edge, you put your vehicle down, your flyer down, for a turn. So your turn, your opponent's turn, so your opponent can react to it. And it's this is where the flyer is coming on to do a strafing run. Your opponent has a chance to shoot it down from that general direction. And then in your second turn, it's just off the board and it's sort of gone in a straight line and it's done something or hit a target or shot at something, as you say, to represent that fast moving speed. So you could do things like that. Is it a big model that's not really on the tabletop? Is that somewhat disappointing? a little bit, maybe, because it's so huge and it's a lot of effort to build and paint up. I love the idea of, especially the guard, like sort of flying heavy armies. So whether that's with scions or like those kind of Elysian style armies that unfortunately Elysian isn't really in the game anymore. But the Tempestos like scions, you was very like lent into the kind of flyer build. So it's a shame to not have them as a playable army. I think is a bit of a shame, but like I said, maybe there are better ways to represent flyers within the game overall.
Yeah, I think so. And not to get too kind of blue sky with it, I think that would really help though, because I'd rather they come up with a sort of added gameplay layer that explicitly expresses the idea of flyers in this type of tabletop scenario to give them a fair place, but also to create some interesting tactical decision making. Because again, it's that thing, isn't it? It's like, you could maybe, for example, if it is a flyer that specifically operates as a troop drop-off, you could use the same quadrant idea and then create a situation where deep striking units could come out, or rather units could be deployed in that quadrant using the deep strike rule on the assertion that the aircraft is in that space. But, again, it becomes one of those things of if you're using the transport thing, it has to come in turns 2 and it can only come on the board, say, turns 2 and 4. So you have like some other tactical flexibility, but it doesn't necessarily offer other benefits. And it becomes like a trade-off and becomes more interesting. I also think because that's the thing, there are also vehicles that maybe kind of fulfill more of a kind of helicopter status. And that, a helicopter, an Apache, or more specifically, the transport one that is Chinook. That's it.
Oh, right, yeah.
Like one of those, like that makes sense in the context of Warhammer 40,000. This thing is going to go up, move at a relative pace to another place and put people there. Yeah. That to me kind of feels logical within the kind of battlefield scale. But the area where it goes absurd is when you deal with things like Elder, where you deal with things like even like Guard or Marines, where they've got these, where they've got these jet engine propelled.
Yeah, like the sort of dogfighter style.
Yeah, that stuff really needs to just sort of... And again, you could interestingly add in another layer. They did this in 7th edition with their expansion.
Death in the Skies.
Death in the Skies. Now, again,
which
that was...
I
didn't like it at all because it was 7th edition. It was completely optional and unnecessarily complicated.
It was completely optional unless one of you opted into it, in which case you both had to do it. That was the rule. So, so famously, I've talked about it many times, at a tournament, my opponent had 2 Orc, like Dakar jets, and I had my Avenger Strike Fighter. I was like, I don't have these rules. I don't have the book. He was like, well, I'm electing to do it, so we have to do it. I was like, okay. And then there's a bunch of maneuvers that you can both select from. This is all pre-game. And I was like, okay, I'm turning left or whatever it was. And then eventually, after resolving a bunch of these random guesses, my fly got shot out of the sky before the game even began. And I was like, oh, okay, this feels great. Yay.
Yeah. I mean, it was... That in that instance and that whole situation was exactly that, though. It was essentially a kind of gotcha for people that weren't as, I guess, well prepared as this individual. But the point is, though, is I think like there's things you can do with flyers, there's things you can do.
Concept-wise, it's very, very interesting, though.
Yeah, exactly. And there's stuff you can do with it. But regardless of that, my point is I think flyers either go away or become like that. And then I think, Firstborn. And I think that's the thing, right? I think ultimately we are staring down the barrel of more loss, more change, more disappointment. Because it happens all the time, right? The Eldari books come out, we've lost a bunch of stuff. Not, necessarily too much in the grand scheme of things. How many people were running Prince Uriel before? I don't know, but you can't now. How many people were using Illic before? I'm pretty sure nobody, but you can't do it anymore. Right. So that's the thing. It's like, it's frustrating, right? Same with the Guard, same with everything. Every book is missing something or has changed something you own to the point that you almost have to buy it again.
Yeah, and that's the aspect of Games Workshop stuff that I don't enjoy. It's like, if you're giving me a better version because the sculpt is better, that, and it's a like-for-like thing. So say Terminators, for example, you had old Terminators and then you had new Terminators. The same with the whole Eldari range. They're just newer versions of the old stuff. You can still run the old stuff if you want to, but ideally, if the model's better, like it just looks nicer, people will just go out and replace stuff. But I think there are lots of models where people either won't do that because they're too numerous, like, your Hormagaunts, your Termagants, your, I don't know, maybe it's like zombies or something from AoS. Like you might
Gene Stealers as well.
Gene Stealers. I can imagine lots of hoardy type stuff. You're like, the difference isn't that noticeable. And ultimately, it took me ages to paint up 40. I'm not going to do another 40 just for slightly better models. Whereas things like Terminators or general units feel much more substantial. But at the same time, it's like I would quite happily run my Krieg army. I'm not going to go out and buy the new plastic Krieg stuff, maybe some of the artillery pieces, but for where I can, I'm just going to run my old stuff. And it's like, I should be allowed to. I only got my Krieg army 10 years ago, which is nothing.
That's a lifetime, mate. That's a lifetime. That's
nothing in the world of the hobby. Like, I only sort of...
You need to buy more Krieg, Phil.
That's what Games Workshop would say. And I would be like, if you spoke to me 5 years ago, I was desperate to buy more Krieg. I was like, please release a new unit. Give us something new and I will buy it in that resin Forge World range. I would happily do that because I want stuff to be kind of consistent and I prefer the style and
you still would now, to be fair,
more.
wouldn't you? If they gave you another one of the resin kits from that range, you'd be
100%. I would totally be all about it. And even now, what I have been doing is, and when I get the codex, I can do it a bit more. I need to basically do an audit of my army and go, what can I still run as WYSIWYG in its current form? What can I find inspiration and lean into and sort of maybe make some new units? So my idea at the moment is to try and get hold of some really old the Grenadier models, which don't exist in the current like plastic variation, because obviously you've got the combat engineers with the skull masks, which look a bit like the Grenadiers, but the Grenadiers aren't there. But if I wanted to, I could run my existing Grenadiers as either Scions, or the Kazakin, because they're basically both hotshot lasguns. So I like the idea of doing like a more Scion themed list. So maybe I can convert some to be a sort of Scion command squad, or like the Tempestus Aquilons. And then I've got more of like an elite guard force being represented by those kind of Grenadier models that don't exist in the current range. Obviously they wouldn't really be backward compatible to like Heresy, or like if we were to play early editions of 40k, which is always something a little bit in the back of my mind because we do that from time to time. But it's like, I don't mind doing that, and I don't mind putting work and converting stuff up. But if they were to sort of just go, oh yeah, literally every single unit you own isn't viable anymore because we've replaced it with a slightly similar but differently named units, and the war gear options are all completely different, that would be super frustrating. So it is really annoying when they do that sort of stuff, and I think it's really anti-consumer, and we should try and call that stuff out when we can do, because I don't think that's good for the customer, but it's good for Games Workshop because it's sort of forcing us to buy new stuff. I would rather the carrot give me a nice new shiny model for me to buy, and I will buy it, but don't force me to almost begrudgingly to buy a unit I already own because it's now no longer viable and it's got to be a slightly different version of itself. That's terrible.
Yeah, but then they've had huge success with that through Primaris and other things. And again,
That's
you raise a really good point, which was the Gaunt ranges, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if GW looked at sales of Gene Stealer kits and Gaunt kits and were like, well, this is massively disappointing because we were expecting all the NID players to rebuy all their Gaunts. We were expecting the NID players to go, look at these sexy new Gaunt minis. I want more of those. Completely failing to appreciate what Gaunts represent to your average NID player. They're such a sort of like nothing. It's like, oh, you know, like, and that's the thing. People who have painted and collected 40, 60, 80 Gaunts aren't falling over themselves to buy more Gaunts.
No,
it's just not happening.
But they would have bought the new Lictor models, or they would have bought the new characters, or the ones that are actually new units.
Did they do it enough? Did they do it enough? And is that also informing their thinking when they're saying like these are now Barrow Guard, these are now combat engineers, these are this, these are that, where they're probably, because I think that NID launch and its probably softness probably has also had an effect, because equally, I don't know necessarily how well Sternguard did. I don't know how well the new Terminator box set did, right? Did those kits do what they were thinking? Did the new Terminator kit do Blade Guard numbers?
I would have thought so. I think the Terminator kit...
I don't know. I'm just saying.
Here's the thing. We don't know.
Don't know.
I think my other point I was going to say in terms of Tyranids, I feel like you have to redo the old models because you're going to have a lot of new players. So the new players that are going to come in who oh yeah, I really want to collect Tyranids. There's a bunch of great new character models. I'm going to buy the Leviathan box set, right? There's going to be those people who will then maybe go, I don't want to actually collect them because there's a bunch of really old models that are awful looking. Those Gaunt models, those old ones are horrible. Whereas now they might go, oh cool, they've updated the whole range. I can actually get the Gaunts and the Hormagaunts and the Gene Stealers, and they're the new ones and they're going to be easier to build. So it's sort of like, yeah, they might not be big sellers, but it's like essential for the life of an army to update the whole range with itself. So and I think the old world probably suffers from this slightly. I think it's a double-edged sword, right? I am the nostalgia old world player. It's like I want to have that old classic old world army. Yeah, it looks a little bit derpy. It looks a bit silly. It's from 4th and 5th edition Warhammer, but to me, that was my Warhammer growing up. Those are the models that I really love. Actually, the later stuff like 6th, 7th edition, I think are kind of terrible, some of those plastics versus the metal stuff. And I've had we've long discussed that in a while. I think the zenith of the metal sculpting was far superior than the earlier days of plastic sculpting. And it's only now where plastic is actually way far superior than the metal stuff. So I can understand that some people will look at the old world and go, oh, this new Bretonnian on foot, knights, gorgeous, because they're new.
Well, they are, yeah, they're phenomenal.
But then I can then imagine that person going, well, in fact, I know people who are like this. They will be like, but I'm not buying the army because the rest of the models are terrible, old, and 20 years old, and they look awful. As a new player, I can imagine a lot of people are like that for the old world, but I think the old world is almost a very specific, unique thing in terms of what it's trying to be. At least in this edition of the game, I suspect next edition it will be like, cool, we're all doing new plastics for everything if it's a big success. But this is like the nostalgia edition.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a thing though. I think with that stuff and people being drawn in, the old metals versus the new plastics and how that whole kind of process is working, again, goes back to what you were saying earlier about the idea of, give me more of the carrot, less of the stick, give me an incentive to want to buy these ranges and kind of enjoy them. But I think overall, yeah, it's an interesting situation they're in because, again, going back to the Gaunt example or going back to the NID example, you're absolutely right. People probably did buy more lictors and they probably did buy more of this stuff. But and again, I can only speak anecdotally to the fact that when 9th edition 40k was being played, every single time I turned up and saw a Space Marine player, they had Blade Guard in their army. Now, that's probably because the rules for Blade Guard were really good. However, these days, when I see Terminator squads in games of Warhammer 40,000, it's usually me playing them, or my opponent has the one squad from Leviathan because they're kind of new.
Yeah.
I very rarely see Terminators appear. I've very rarely seen Sternguard. If I do see Sternguard or I do see Terminators, they're the Leviathan kits. I've almost never seen the multi-part plastic Terminator kits in the wild, and I've almost never seen the multi-part Sternguard kit anywhere.
I think, but I imagine most Space Marine players bought the Leviathan, so therefore, do you need another unit of both of those? The same with the Blade Guard, right? Yes, there are multi-part kits, but the majority of Blade Guards you'll ever see will be from the Indomitus kits.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, again, I think that's the thing. There's so many variables to it. It's hard to say for certain because we don't know what their sales performances were. I'm just saying anecdotally, it felt like new things maybe had more impact than old things.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I think,
even though I love them,
with Sternguard especially, is yes, there are old models out there in the wild. I suspect the majority of people playing with Sternguard will use the new models because most people's Space Marine collections are now all Primaris or predominantly all Primaris, and a lot of the players will have gotten in at either 8th edition or later, like myself, or they're people that have just updated their collection because they're huge Space Marine fans. I can't imagine someone going, yeah, I've got all these old models, and I've also got all the Primaris, and oh yeah, cool, new Sternguard kits come out, but I'm still going to run my old metal Sternguard with my all plastic Primaris army. I mean, I guess it might happen, but it feels like you're now in one of two camps. You're either you're rocking a Firstborn army and that's your theme, or you're just all in on Primaris and that's predominantly all you're going to have.
I think that's it though, isn't it? I think ultimately, who knows for sure what people are doing in the general sense. I mean, I love the new Sternguard kit. I think it's one of the standout kits of the new Marine releases of 10th edition. I love the Terminator kit. I'm a big fan of both those kits. I think they're great. The Pyro Marines, the Inferno were the real letdown for me, but the other stuff was all lovely stuff. But I mean, overall, I guess just to kind of try and put a bow around this conversation and sum it up, I think it's been a really interesting period in the hobby because this is the first time in my experience, which, as I identified earlier, has spanned many, many years, that we're essentially being propositioned with this need for change. And it seems like it's driven by a multitude of factors. But regardless of being kind of pragmatic about that and ultimately analysing those factors and identifying where they're coming from, the cold, hard reality is that we as consumers are being basically made to regret and feel bad for purchase decisions we've made in relative recent history, whether that's buying a codex that only had relevancy for a few months or buying a range of miniatures 6 years ago that has now been utterly eradicated and in many instances replaced for broadly the same thing. You know, it's like, oh, I got into playing Blood Angels 3 years ago, so I bought all this Death Company stuff, and now my Death Company isn't this anymore. I can still kind of use it, but how do I represent that weapon? What do I do about this? What do I do about that? It's complicated. And again, even though 99.9% of the people you play across the tabletop in a pickup game aren't going to care and are going to happily let you do it, you're still going to have a conversation about it. That's always the thing I always find, and it frustrates you because I, for a very long time, when running my Blood Angels army, would run assault squads as assault intercessors with jump packs. But I still had to have a conversation about it every time I turned up to the table because they'd be like, oh, so what are they? I was like, well, they're assault Marines. And what are you doing? What are those then? Well, they're assault intercessors with jump packs. And they're like, oh, okay. And you're like, well, yeah, because they've got a chainsword and a bolt pistol and a jump pack and they're on the same size base. It's not that hard, is it? To sort of like, you know, but you still had to say it because people had to ask because it's not the standard, you know, default miniatures. You've got to have the conversation. And I think that's the thing. I think ultimately, yes, it's fine. Most people, all the people generally are really cool with it, but you still have to go through the motions and it's still frustrating and you still have to process all of that frustration and loss. I think there's a lot of Stormcast players who are really annoyed. There's a lot of Blood Angels players who were underserved by that release. There's a lot of Marine players in the general sense that were let down with the release of 10th. There's people with all sorts of things. Commissar Yarrick, for example, in 9th edition. There's all sorts of stuff that's gone wrong. And I think it has created a sense of skepticism within kind of people's trust and faith with GW doing the right thing. I do think this will come to a close. I think we will get to a place in the next 3 years where GW have finally ripped the plaster off entirely and drawn their lines and let us all know what is and what isn't Warhammer 40,000 anymore. But it's still frustrating because in a way, had they torn it off entirely in a oneer, I think that would have been extraordinarily painful, but you could have probably would have adjusted to it by now. This kind of death by many cuts type thing is just kind of consistently creating this dialogue around the situation that is definitely breeding some frustration. But ultimately, it is what it is. GW are clearly doing what they think is best for business and best for them. They're obviously seeing positive results for examples like Primaris and examples like, Stormcast or whatever. So fine, this is the way it is. But I think it's a shame because I genuinely used to really appreciate and love the fact that I could turn up to a game of Warhammer 40,000 in, say, 7th edition and be playing across the table from an individual with an army made entirely of miniatures that they bought in 2nd edition 40k, and there was no need for that conversation that I just expressed before between a assault marine and an assault intercessor with jump pack.
Yeah.
Right?
Because it was it was always probably going to be on the same base for the most part. Because really the rebasing stuff only really happened, I think, from sort of 8th edition onwards when bases started.
7th edition was when it started.
Oh, okay.
That was when Marines moved on to the, what is it now, 32?
Yeah. Okay, it was 7th. Okay. Yeah. But as you say, for the most part, there was a sort of slow evolution of units that was always, It was never like a big leap, and it was an evolution rather than a replacement. It's definitely led to some like kind of a lack of consumer confidence and trust in terms of the things I buy are going to be valid in the future. Whereas it used to feel like the concept of squatting was very rare. It did happen, but like once in a blue moon. Now it's like, any day of the month it could happen to something within Games Workshop. And then I guess you go, well, how long will it be before they do it all over again for 40k? At what point are they going to be like those Gene Stealer cult models or those Sisters of Battle, which, they're 5 years old at the moment, but when they're 10 years old, are they just going to wipe them all over and give them brand new models? Like, because I feel like with the current plastic range that's come out, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous. Can it get any better? And, we maybe thought about that, with the old tactical Marines when they last came out. But at what point are they going to not be able to really redo units? Which is, I sort of feel like the whole concept of the slight differences and replacements, where they're giving us something not exactly the same. And that's how they're going to get around it in the future, basically. So it'd be interesting to see what will happen. The last thing I wanted to touch on, because it does relate to this, which was a bit of armies on parade controversy that happened in the last week. So basically people found out the sort of terms and conditions for the armies on parade specifically stated that you can't use parts and models from one game system in another. So if you had converted up an army, you couldn't say use 30k parts in a 40k army, but also likewise you couldn't use fantasy parts like from AoS into 40k. So for example, my Thunder Warriors army, which uses Stormcast models as a base, couldn't be used or entered in because it's from a completely different game system. So this was very like hardline Games Workshop. No, everything must be from, must belong to the system from which it derives, which is very extreme.
I mean, fair play to the GW store manager or Warhammer store manager who can meticulously ensure that every one of these meets that criteria. I mean, your knowledge will have to be pretty encyclopedic to be able to denote whether that, combat knife came from an old world or, orc, black orc, or whether, and again, like, even then, right? So, like, I mean, I would just, as a joke for that, find all the miniatures that work in both Old World and Age of Sigmar and do all of those, just go straight into that. Be like, this is my AoS thing, and it's just all Old World minis. Just like,
lots of people were complaining about it, and it sounds like Games Workshop have backtracked and they did a social media post where they sort of clarified that, what we meant was like you couldn't have a Tyrannid model in Age of Sigmar, for example, but if you want to use parts from a model to kitbash and convert it into something else that's more setting appropriate, that is fine. That's what it should be, right? It's of course you wouldn't have a Gene Stealer in Age of Sigmar, but if you're going to use like that head, maybe it can work.
I just recently was reading Realm of Chaos, Slaves to Darkness, right? And that to me is like the ethos. It's the
ultimate crossover.
Mad, exactly. The mad topsy-turvy world of everything is anything. And this is the thing, right? Like, up until recently, in fact, still now, you can still run a warp forge demon thing.
Soul Grinder.
Soul Grinder, thank you. Yeah, that's still viable in multiple different armies in AoS, and that'd be hilarious. Just turn up and go, yeah, there's the one.
Here's on parade. Soul Grinder army.
Exactly, it's all Soul Grinders. You're like, whatever, that's what it is.
Yeah, that one I've always found mad. But yeah, the original Slaves to Darkness book and Realms of Chaos, back in that edition, like Rogue Trader basically made a big thing about the universes of fantasy and 40k sort of existing at the same time. You could have bolt guns in Warhammer Fantasy because it'd be like, it wasn't even necessarily time travel. It was just through the warp, right? It was just things existed in both systems quite happily.
Well, it was heavily implied at one point that the old world, or rather Warhammer Fantasy, was a world within the Eye of Terror, within the warp, right? Like that was the whole.
I think as a kid, I always assumed maybe because obviously the old world looks like Earth, that it was like an early version of Terror before anything else. So you could have gone, oh yeah, it's a historical version of Earth before. But yeah, I think maybe that's the fact that they could exist at the same time is maybe it is it's within the universe somewhere, or say in the warp, and everything's a bit timey-wimey and all sorts of stuff.
Well, that was the thing with the lizard men, right? They were basically trying to follow the plan of the
Slan,
of the Slan, but the Slan were descendants, or rather
from the old ones.
It was the old ones, right? So the idea was that the old ones... Again, you don't really hear enough about the old ones anymore, do you?
That's interesting. So the Old World book, the new rule book, actually mentions, obviously talks like the history of the Old World created by the Old Ones. The first people they created were the Slan, and then obviously all the lizard men type people, and then they created the elves and the dwarves and the humans. Yeah. And then obviously chaos comes in and sort of ruins it all. And then they just jump ship and disappear. The Slan are left to sort of deal with the mess, and they make a deliberate nod and wink to Age of Sigmar in the Old World book. So it's interesting that they sort of, they basically hint that the old ones know that the old world isn't going to be around forever and that something greater might come of it, which is them referencing the end times and the creation of the mortal realms.
That is all canon, though, right? Like,
exactly.
Age of Sigmar is the next stage of it. I know. So
they've sort of gone back and sort of, I guess, retcons that obviously happens. But it makes perfect sense because obviously that did happen. It's interesting they put it in there, though. I didn't know if they would, which I thought was quite interesting.
Well, there were like stories, weren't there, once upon a time where I can't remember which book it was in, but it was specifically talking about the idea that there was this silver or like white knight character that was like battling demons and like doing all the rest of it, and it was heavily stated that it was Caldor Drago from the Grey Knights, and the idea is that he was actually like he was basically battling demons in the times of fantasy, basically, and he was this bold silver warrior or whatever, like a knightly character. Anyway, we're going off on a tangent as we often do. My point is, overall, is that I think, it's relatively easy to assert that GW are doing what they think is best for business. And I think what they think is best for business is creating these IPs to try and essentially have kind of marketable, contained things that they can attempt to kind of offshoot into other areas of entertainment, but also enable them to kind of segment and understand the kind of breadth and popularity of those particular games and ranges, right? So I get what they're doing. The problem is with it is that as a result, this kind of weird bitty approach that they've taken in terms of releasing that and making that commonplace is ultimately a consequence of how they do business. They can't change it all overnight, right? You know, you listen to interviews with like Rick Priestley or whomever, and they talk about how 20 years ago they were talking about moving their entire range to plastic. They still haven't done it.
No,
and even 20 years later. Exactly. So,
it takes a while to steer that ship. I mean, it's also interesting to go on a slight tangent, but it does relate to this, is that Games Workshop doesn't always get it right. So obviously they destroyed the old world. and then did Age of Sigmar, but then Total War stuck around and was advertising, free advertisement for the old world and for a model range that you could get in Age of Sigmar at the time, but the rank and flank square bases thing just didn't exist at that point.
Well, it did in vanilla Age of Sigmar at the very start.
Yes, you could have kept your bases. Yeah, that is true. But the fantasy setting that was advertised in the Total War game didn't exist because that was the old world, not the Mortal Realms. And then you have a slight similar thing happening. So obviously they try to get rid of Death Watch outside of the agents of the Imperial agents. So the classic the classic Death Watch veterans existed, but that was kind of it, and the Corvus Black Star. But then you had obviously Space Marine 2, which is entire intro sequence was old school Death Watch veterans. And then you had, I think it was Joy Toys did an animation for the not Warhammer Fest, Warhammer Anniversary, and it was Namco.
Namco,
yeah, it was a completely random company, right? And it was again veteran, old style Space Marines, but Death Watch, and I was once again advertising Death Watch, and then you have Astartes 2 trailer come out again, obviously all old style Space Marines, but then the teaser for it is that it is Death Watch, and it's like all the outside media, with the exception of Secret Level, is advertising on some level Death Watch, but then
even Secret Level has a nod to Death Watch because it's got
yes, technically true.
And he's carrying iconography of the Death Watch. Anyway,
but
it's very tenuous. Well, not tenuous; it's quite direct, but you have to know.
Yeah, but all the outside media is pointing at some level to Death Watch, but then Games Workshop internally for 40k is trying to do away with Death Watch as a faction outside of the Imperial agents, which just doesn't really make sense. If people are coming into the game fresh and they've seen any of that outside media, they're going to be like, oh, Death Watch, where can I get hold of it? And it's like, oh, well, you can, there's these Space Marines, but they're not really Death Watch, and you can't really run Death Watch. I mean, now you can because of the legacy PDF.
I still think Death Watch make more sense as a unit within other armies.
I
do understand. But I do absolutely understand that they've dug themselves into this situation. I think genuinely, like, they figured it out with Mechanicum because basically they had Codex Qatari, Codex Agmech, and they managed to smush them together and range it to the point where they went, this one now makes sense in its own thing. It almost has no reason to exist because it essentially is like another flavour of Guard with a few extra weird things thrown in, but whatever, it exists now, so let it be, and one day we'll figure out how to write some interesting rules for it, but it hasn't happened yet. Although, to be fair, it depends how you interpret interesting, because they definitely had a lot of complicated rules. Whether those are interesting or not is up to you. And then they've done it again with Harlequins. Harlequins were a late 7th edition where they went, oh, Harlequins, everyone loves Harlequins, and now they're going, oh God, what do we do with these? Let's just put them into Eldari and try and figure it out. Yannari, oh God, what have we done? Put it into there, do something with it. Same thing with GSE to an extent, although they has sort of managed to kind of carve out a little niche, but they're kind of like, really GSE should just be like a few bolt-ons to a Guard army or a few bolt-ons to a mid army to try and give them a bit of flavour, but they've made them their own thing. I think they've done all right with GSE and Admech because they've done enough, but they're definitely in the case of Death Watch, Harlequins, and Yannari.
I guess
they're just technically
Scions were also...
Scions were one as well.
They got their own book, but then obviously it's weird because those things are all much like in AoS. AoS does sort of mini factions much better, where they're like, cool, here's your Gloom Spike. It's basically 4 sub factions that are all quite distinct from each other. They're all quite distinct, and you can theme your army in and lean into just one of those things if you want, or you can do a bit of everything. Although I do constantly feel like it's like, just split them out. Like, for Orruk, War Clans, where you've got, your Ironjaws and you've got your Cruel Boys, they just feel like they should be 2 separate books, but I can understand that they are just keeping them all together, under one. Yeah, and similar like with Scions, it's like they're sort of not quite big enough to be an army in their own right, but they feel like they should be, but they'd need a lot more in terms of like units to do that. But then maybe there just needs to be a bit like Virginia Cedar Cockerel, where it's like, yeah, cool, you can add in some extra guard stuff if you want, but predominantly they should be their own separate thing. And same with Harlequins should really be like that. It's like either, I don't know if that like they just don't have the will, or maybe they just don't think they need more units. Maybe they're like, no, the law for Harlequins is just these things and that's it. There is no more scope to create new units, which sounds puzzling because you would have thought Games Workshop would, if they wanted to, just go, yeah, here's some new stuff.
Yeah, but I think the reality is like really at the end of like 7th edition or 6th edition, 7th edition, you got the Scions, you got the Death Watch, you got we've done the examples. But the point is they were just these little things that were intended more to be like added on to stuff, but they kind of frivolously went, but you could make armies out of them.
Yeah.
But then 8th edition came along and said, no, you will make armies out of them. They're armies now. And then ever since then, people are going, why did we do that? Like, and now people have built armies for Death Watch, they've built armies for Grey Knights, they've built armies for Harlequins, and Games Workshop are going, yeah, we mucked up, we need to roll that back. But the thing is they now are in this position where
they're upsetting people. Yeah,
exactly. But that's on top of upsetting more people all the time.
Yeah.
And the thing is, right, it's like, here's the thing. I think enough of us are sensible enough and mature enough to understand what they've given Death Watch right now is a stopgap, but they are going to just become a unit.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what's happening. Harlequins have become that. They've just sort of had to suck it up. Ynnari, to be honest, at this point, should just get deleted. They're pointless. Like, I don't understand why they even bother, but they do it because for whatever reason, they can't help themselves but give Ynnari units the most mental rules. So they're going to just eventually go, here you go, Ynnari players. Yet again, you're the best version of Elder, so the tournament players will use you.
Do you think
well, I don't know if they are yet.
Okay. Well, I guess
but that's just,
we'll find out.
There has never been an edition thus far where Ynnari haven't been the best way to take Elder armies. Like,
right.
So we'll wait and see. But anyway, my point is that, yeah, I think it is interesting because obviously, for example, what could be happening with the Grey Knights? We know Grey Knights are we know Grey Knights are coming around the corner, or at least we think we do. Were they in the roadmap?
Yes, I want to say they were, yeah. And they did say they were getting a codex for sure when obviously Grey Knights, so when Death Watch, they were like, nah, you're not getting that.
So maybe we're getting a full refresh on Grey Knights and that'd be great, but that's the thing, like Grey Knights probably can support that. Yeah,
well, Grey Knights
really
has got a decent sized army and sort of more unique stuff than Death Watch. I think that the caveat with Death Watch is I can see why if you're a new player. So my example was there's cool loads of Death Watch media out there. You come into the hobby brand new. You want to be a Death Watch player. Let's say you go, okay, cool, there's a legacy PDF, my rules are free, great. And then you'll be like, oh, what these kill team things to, Joe at the Games Workshop store? And he's like, well, you can buy some intercessors and you can buy some, hellblasters and you can buy some pyroblasters. And you've got to buy all 3 boxes to make 1 unit of your kill team. And you'll be like, that's over £100. Can't I just run them as 1 unit? And you're like, oh, well, you can, but they're not the kill teams. They're just the regular Space Marines painted black with a silver shoulder pad. So from that logic of coming into the whole concept of kill teams, I could understand that being very daunting and maybe frustrating as a new player, because it's not just like I'm buying a box and building it, which is Games Workshop's mantra for everything. Like, it's got to have rules because it's going to have rules for the things in the box, and kill teams throws that out the window. And that's very sort of old school converting, kit bashing, which I don't mind. And I think the concept of kill teams is kind of cool, but as we've discussed many times, I don't think it's necessarily army-wide appropriate. I think adding them into an extra force is sort of, to me, where the flavour of Death Watch is, rather than doing a full army of Death Watch, as cool as that would be in and of its own right.
Well, indeed. Well, yeah, I think I agree with you. I think it's confusing because, again, you're right. In the case of Total War, it was mad. I always remember going into the store and seeing their kind of propaganda, their advertising for basically, oh, you play Total War, buy the army. And it was like literally all these like random higgledy-piggledy Empire and, Dark Elf miniatures being shown off. But it was sort of like, I was like, cool, how do I run them? And it's like, that's confusing because we don't really know how to explain this to you. Because now they're now under the banner of the cities of Sigmar. And it's like, okay, this is whatever. Immediately, they did do those legacy PDFs for the specific old armies for Old World, which still, I think, are not in effect to this day. I think you still can run some of those old formations, those armies of legends, those historical armies. But anyway, yeah, the Death Watch thing is interesting. It's all interesting. I think ultimately the most sensible thing that I would say to anyone getting into it is that, ultimately, if you're starting out with the hobby and you're wanting to play and get involved with it, your best bet is to just stick with the mainstream current kind of ranges and not try to diversify too much. If it looks like it's an old kit or it has a Space Marine with a funny head that you don't recognize because it's not a Primaris one, don't buy it because it's probably getting discontinued. Ultimately, it's just weird. It's a weird time in the hobby because everything feels very, not negative, but definitely frustrating because you just, because you put a lot of energy into these projects. You put a lot of yourself into it. You really want to kind of express yourself and have something truly uniquely yours. And you get excited about these ideas and these armies and these concepts. And then they just come along and go, yeah, but no. And you're like, oh man, like I put so much work into this and now I can't show it off. And it's like, oh, well.
It's not like it's a pack of cards that you spent a $5 on. It's a bit more disposable. It's something you spent a lot of money on. You spent a lot of time building it and painting it, and you want to then be able to play. And most people don't play every week. A lot of people play once every few months. So you want that unit to still be around ultimately for years. That's why it was like 10 years is not a long time. If you only game like twice a year with a buddy that you see once in a blue moon, that's, in 10 years, that could just be like 20 games, which isn't anything. But obviously that's not a lot of gaming by most people's standards. But I had a similar issue recently. So obviously I've been looking at Soulblight Gravelords for, Age of Sigmar. I had a corpse cart, that I got for a kit bash ages ago. I did this Rat King model where I took the dead bodies and turned them into dead bodies with some legs on. And that was like a little kind of kit bash that I made. But I've got the rest of the corpse cart model. And I was like, oh, should I build that? And it's like, yeah, I'm missing some bits and I could maybe get that on a bit site. And I'm like, well, I'll just hold out until the book comes out because it's coming in the next month. That corpse cart model is an old fantasy model. So it might go away in the new edition because all the fantasy models are feeling like they're being extracted via Chinook to the old world, right? So it might be, but then again, that model might later on be replaced with a brand new, like for like, cool new Age of Sigmar mini. And maybe I'd rather have that than an old one that I've maybe converted up to fill in the missing bits that I've got. So yeah, it's a bit of a rock and a hard place with things like that. And maybe that's just a sort of, very niche specific thing to my situation. But I think a lot of people are like that when they're collecting models. There's a bunch of like sort of fantasy models in the existing AoS lines. And do you want to buy it now? And, maybe it's valid for this edition, but you're not 100% sure it'll be valid for the next edition because that model might disappear to go back to fantasy. And likewise, a bunch of stuff for, 40k might happen as well because it looks a bit dated and might just be replaced with something else. So yeah, it's something that all buyers have to be aware of at least when they're buying kits that aren't brand new ones.
But also as well, I suppose, and again, we should obviously make a point of saying this is all predicated around, I've used predicated a lot in this conversation, I apologise. This is all stated from the perspective of people that are buying miniatures with the express purpose of using them as gaming pieces. The reason why this all isn't anti-consumer and all negative, even though you can make the connection and make the argument that you purchase these things as a direct response to the game system and the rules as written. The reality is you still own the physical artifact that you bought, and so much of the kind of and similarly the extra stuff, the rules and all of that kind of, fleeting ideas are just that, right? Like they're relevant for the moment, but they will change over time. But even then, the rules will exist in perpetuity, so you can still use and play older editions of the game, and you can still have and collect and own these miniatures. So it does become one of those weird things where it's like, you can be all like butthurt about it because you'll be going, oh, my, old Stormcast army isn't relevant. Well, it's like, yeah, well, you just continue to use it in an old edition of the game, or you still own the kits. Now, I get you. That is relevant to those people, but there are plenty of people out there who bought Stormcast kits, painted them up and put them on a shelf and never put them on a tabletop. And that probably actually represents a larger proportion of GW's customer base than us who want to play the game with it. So this is the thing. It's like, as much as this is irritating and it is creating bad vibes amongst people who play Games Workshop games, how much of an impact does it really have on their overarching customer base? And the answer is probably not very much, because ultimately it's about the churn. At the end of the day, for every one of us grumpy old 40-year-olds who've had enough of the way that GW is and are moving on to do something else, there's a 10-year-old waiting in the wings to take your place. And that's just how it is. This is the churn. Ultimately, no one is irreplaceable. You don't matter. Your thoughts and feelings are irrelevant. And ultimately, Games Workshop will continue to do everything they can to make as much money out of everyone they have addicted to this strange but wonderful hobby in perpetuity. And that is my closing statement on it. Phil, take us home before I transition us out of here.
Open up your wallet and pay out is what you're saying. In a slightly more thought out answer, I think you are right to an extent. I think saying you can just play old editions is a bit of a wishy-washy answer. Yes, you technically can, but most people don't. But you should, and I actually think more people should be doing those kind of things. More people should be embracing the old school concept of just making rules up for something. And I feel like the current zeitgeist around Games Workshop is they are the arbiter of everything, and what they say goes. And I don't think that should be the case. I think people should be much more comfortable with making up their own missions, and they should be much more comfortable with them taking old units and giving them new life by writing new rules for them. It's like, yeah, you can't use a Leviathan Dreadnought in 40k anymore, but why not? Just find that old PDF and just port it across and give it some new points, or create your own rules based on it. I think those sorts of things are much more fun and interesting to do within the hobby, but those require friends or a gaming group that is very open-minded about those things. And a lot of people are just tournament players, and obviously you can't do those things at tournaments. And I think that's where the real sort of sticking point for me is on those sorts of things. If that's the sort of thing you're predominantly going to be doing, then you are a bit stuck with those old models. But yeah, overall, it is what it is. And yes, open up your wallet and pay out for new stuff. So says Games Workshop.
Transitional noise. All right, me and Phil went somewhere and did something alongside our dear friends, Richie and Sean. So it's only customary that when we go somewhere and do something, we talk about it because, we've got nothing else to do. Right, Phil?
Certainly. We're trapped here forever until content materializes from us.
Absolutely. This is our purgatory, obligatory lifestyle that we love to live.
Yeah, because of all those 5-star reviews, basically, we're trapped here.
That's it. Although, again, actually, that's a good reminder. Before this comes out, I need to figure that bit out. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But, please do leave us a 5-star review in places where 5-star reviews can be left, like iTunes, Spotify. Not that you can actually leave reviews there, but you can click 5 stars. Like and subscribe. All that good stuff. Anyway, we went to Warhammer World in Nottingham to play what, Phil?
Age of Sigmar, Doubles, Throne of Skulls. Throne of Skulls is just the tagline for a slightly more casual event than their grand tournament ones. I think that's the generic name for the more tournament-y tournaments, whereas this is a less tournament-y tournament because it's said tournament.
In place of casual, I always like to say confusing, because I feel like most people who are there playing don't really understand that the wins and losses really don't matter, but they definitely feel it when, deep down in their bones,
Yeah, and I would say everyone there, including myself, didn't know all the rules 100% all the time.
Speak for yourself, Phil. I was 100% on it 100% of the time.
I highly doubt that.
That can't be true. Apparently I made one mistake that I found out about, which is that narholes come down at the start of the battle round as opposed to the start of our hero phase. That was a mistake I made. However, most of the time our opponents were making us go first, and most of the time we were going first throughout. So it was one of those weird ones where it only came up around like game 4 because for the first time in ages we were going second, and we're like, oh, there you go. Lesson learned.
That's fair. I got a couple of rules wrong as well. Mostly, I didn't realise that if you have something that does a reaction, so I had I think it was a heroic artifact that does a reaction to someone activating in combat, you can only do it once per phase.
Well, yes, because that would be... Because like anything, right? It's like the rule of one, essentially, isn't it?
Well, exactly. But for some weird reason, I assumed reactions, because you're reactivating to something, you'd be able to do it each time it's activated. But you can't. So but then
there are some reactions, like all-out defense, that continue being in effect, I suppose, but ultimately...
But you've only triggered it once, and that trigger lasts for the phase. And,
so what was the reaction?
So every time someone fought in the combat range of my hero, my
that D3 Mortals thing.
I do D3 mortal wounds on a 2+. So sometimes, and it was very rare, I would activate it several times in a phase. And to be fair, the majority of the time I didn't roll it, but there were times I've technically gotten a couple of extra cheeky mortal wounds on people because I was just playing it wrong.
Well, you best go back to the organisers and remove yourself from the rankings. Step away and let that 49th or 48th place go to someone who really deserves it.
Yes, maybe. I'll write to each of my opponents individually and let them know on a postcard.
You best do. I think it's only fair and right. That's an interesting thing about it, though, isn't it, in terms of like the scoring of it? So, yeah, basically, if you've never been to a Throne of Skulls at Warhammer World before, it is weird because basically painting score, which is rewarded by the attendees, as well as favourite game votes, which are awarded by the attendees, essentially carry as much weight as winning. So essentially
or it counts as a win. In terms of points, it's the same.
Yeah, so effectively, you can get a potential... 30 points out of favourite game and favourite army votes. And you can get a potential 15 points from winning all your games. So the highest possible score you could have accrued is 45, basically.
Because each team gives 2 favourite game votes, which is for their opponent's conduct, I guess, or the game itself. And then 2 favourite army votes. And obviously each of those votes... For army, for example, have to go to 2 different people, but you can double up and give the same team both a favourite game and favourite army vote.
Blimey! So there is the potential there for you to get so it's a potential for you to get 60 points from your opponent.
I guess so. If that's the maths, yeah,
that's wild. So basically, the maximum score you could have got is 75 points.
Yeah, sounds about right.
That sounds wild. Anyway, so basically, long story short, it doesn't really matter if you win or lose. Which creates this interesting dynamic, because if you bring an army that can win, like me and Richie did, not that we desperately try-harded to win, we just played the game, but it's fair to say that...
to your maximum potential.
Yeah, well, look, man, I mean, the problem is, I don't think I'm a bad opponent to play against. Typically, I do quite well, but I think, again, you have to have... I think, again, it really depends on the crowd. It really depends on the opponents and what they're looking for. And it's always weird, right? Because, like, game 1, we played against a team that were quite inexperienced, and we won that very comfortably. Game 2, our opponent basically handed us a win through failing to make a 9-inch charge on 3d6 with a reroll. So essentially the win was handed. Well, there was a cascading series of errors on their part. Not errors, but just unfortunate happenstance. And then game 3, we basically beat a team that had won the 2 games prior and were a little bit frustrated to lose that game. And then they proceeded, by the way, to win all the remaining games, and they got best destruction player overall, having only lost to me and Richie. Game 4, we played against a nice lad and his son. The lad himself is some sort of Yorkshire Viking fella. I believe he's associated with or does content creation with the Team England people. He may himself be on Team England, I'm not sure, but he was very good at the game, and his son was there too, and we managed to beat him. And to be fair, he was a good dude. Not really much bad to say about that. And then, in fact, actually, I think that was the one I voted my favourite game because it was a really, challenging experience. And then, the last game we lost. But it is what it is. It was interesting. But overall, we got one favourite game vote out of the whole thing and no favourite army votes, which is understandable. I painted mine relatively rapidly. Haven't even posted pictures of them on Instagram or nothing because, they're not an extraordinarily amazing paint job. I think they paint it consistently well, but they're not going to... Well, evidently, they're not going to win any best painted.
They're solid tabletop standards. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But they're little scabies, so they're they are what they are. And Richie, to his credit, tried his best, but he, again, left it quite late. So, again, there was a little bit of rapidness to that paint scheme. So it is what it is.
Definitely one of his nicest armies so far, I would say.
Oh, definitely. I think if he allowed himself... Yeah, I think if he allowed himself just the smallest amount of extra time, I think he could achieve some really great results. And not that he doesn't achieve good results with what he works to. But yeah, look, long story short, we got 4 wins, 1 loss. The loss was in the final game to the team that won the overall... Well, again, they won the overall tournament, so that was cool. But yeah, it was what it was. I think that's the weird thing with those games. You come away from it and... Yeah, you just sort of get sucked into the sort of popularity contest side of it. And then you get the overall score. So I think me and Richie came 40th overall with 4 wins, 1 loss. So yeah, that just sort of speaks to the intriguing element of it. And I don't think we were horrible opponents to anyone, but I just think we beat people that probably weren't keen on the fact they lost, and that was that. Or they played other better people, so it is what it is.
Yeah, I think once you get to the 3 wins and above, you're getting people that are probably taking it quite seriously.
Yes. Yeah.
But as you say, I also think the voting isn't really indicative of you or your team or your army. It's more indicative of the other people that they play against. And it's like, you could be a fantastic player, you could have an amazing army, but they just had another 1 or 2 opponents that were just slightly better than you.
Which is, by all accounts, what happened, I suppose.
Well, that's what we will, believe
that's
ourselves.
What we'll say.
That's what we'll say. That's what we go with. But I mean, who's to say? On the way back, I came up with the idea that maybe you rank favorite games and favorite armies for every opponent, and you do it on a sliding scale of 1 to 5. That way, if every person is a good, jolly person, then you'll all score much higher, rather than it being a all or nothing, which is sort of a winner takes all kind of situations, which is what you currently have. I guess the only downside to that is you will get definitive feedback if you're a terrible person or your army's awful, because you're getting scores from every opponent, which is, maybe what some people need. But you would need thick skin to come away from that event and be like, cool, I scored 1s for all favourite game votes. I must be a terrible person. That will be, at least now in the current system, we can believe that we were nice enough, but just not the best.
I think that, again, that's one of those weird systems that can be gamed in a weird way, because if you're really keen on winning, you could just be giving low scores to everybody. And again, I think that's
true. That is true.
I think the problem is, right, at the end of the day, what you have to realise is Throne of Skulls events essentially are popularity contests, and you achieve popularity by having a nicely painted army with a really cool over-the-top theme. So many of the armies that do well have really beautifully custom-built things that are all very spangly and lovely, and the quality of the painting is always extraordinarily high. And then, you just have to kind of rock up, not care whether you win or lose. In fact, you're actively encouraged to give the game away. Like most of the people who do well, who actually win the overall, kind of scrape by with 2 to 3 wins, and presumably the whole time are just kind of voluntarily doing stuff that's not in the best interest of winning the game, but
or
just
maybe it's more fun or whatever.
Yeah, it's more fun.
Although I guess so, it's to be said there was sort of there was the Throne of Skulls winner, which was the favourite game votes included on, and then there was the best in factions, which Chaos, Death, Order, Destruction. Plus there was like mixed. I don't. Which is for someone that doesn't fall into those other buckets, and that was just based on wins.
Score, yeah.
Oh, it wasn't actually even on your wins and losses, right? It wasn't it just your actual scores that you achieved, like your victory points, basically throughout the missions. So again,
Correct.
that's like yeah, it's odd that there's like several different methods of scoring in this one sort of overall system. So if you want to go and be a very competitive person, you can sort of do that even at these slightly more, less tournamenty events.
Exactly. But the truth is, you just have to sort of divorce yourself from any of that thinking and just go along and try and have fun with it and not try and win and not try and lose, especially. Just sort of, go along, have a laugh, be a nice person, try your best, but ultimately, don't try hard. That's the trick, I think.
Basically.
But ultimately, it's difficult, though, in the moment, though, right? Because at the same time, like, I don't know. My concern always is maybe I'm just too hardwired to when I play the game in event settings that I want to try and play it properly. But it's that thing where it's like, I don't know. For me, I don't have a good gaming experience when I'm just trying to throw it away. I am trying to play to the best of my abilities. But yeah, whatever. It's an interesting learning curve. I think the AoS crowd are also a bit different from the 40k crowd. I think, more and more that I go and spend time with like the AoS crowd, I feel like, many times I'm like, oh, there are a lot of really good people here who are kind of on my wavelength and I'm kind of enjoying it. But then I also find that there are a lot of very, like, I think when you actually level into the kind of like, air quotation marks, good players, the kind of try-hardy attitudes are almost more extreme in my experience. But, there is a delta between them and like the normal players. But like, yeah, I don't know. I think AoS is a really good game. I really enjoy it as a system. I think it's got lots of fun mechanics. I really rate it. I encourage people to play it. But you always come away from these events with a bit of a sort of thing, especially when you don't do well from a favourite game perspective, because you're like, just obviously I might have not just been a nice person that weekend or not done as well as I could. Because like typically for me, and I know this sounds incredibly arrogant, but typically for me when I go to like 40k events, I get a few favourite game votes, which is lovely, and I appreciate it.
You're shining your Night of Inner Circle award in the background.
Well,
there.
at this point, mate, that person is no longer who I am. Mate. Like, I mean, this is the thing. Like, the guy who won that is on a on a cellular level isn't me anymore, so I can't really even claim ownership of it. I mean, for all I know, it's a collective fiction in the Matrix or whatever. But anyway, the point is that. Yeah, I don't know, mate. I think, on the whole, I thought the event was good. I enjoy playing Age of Sigmar. I enjoy playing with Richie. He's a great doubles partner, and his army really complemented mine well. I think me and him have a really good... But I think and again, I don't know whether... And this is arrogant. I think I'm quite good at synergizing with most people. Like, I leave people to kind of do their own thing, and I kind of trust in what they're doing, and then try and sort of fill in around it. Like, Richie wasn't getting annoyed with me, so to speak, but he was constantly looking towards me for validation or sort of affirmation of what he was doing. He'd be like, "Oh, what do you reckon?" I was like, "I don't know, do what you want to do." He's like, "But I need input."
So you weren't doing a team discussion about where stuff's going and what you're doing. You were basically separately playing the same game.
No. I tell him he'd do something, and I do something in response. I was like, okay, that's what he's done. I'll try and fill in the blanks. Because I don't like to try and steer the situation. I mean, sometimes it's necessary, and you've doubled with me a few times, mate, and I feel like the same is true. We have a broad conversation about what we think like the best tactical options are, but at that point, it's sort of like, yeah, all right, go do. I don't know. Would you say that when we've doubled together that I've tried to backseat drive your army? I don't feel like I do. But...
I'm probably not, but normally we've done very well when we've teamed up. So I sometimes maybe just defer to your judgment. I don't know. But then sometimes you're like, yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just do what you want. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah. But I think that's the thing. Like genuinely, like I think me and Rich, we definitely had a good sort of like because we play a lot together. I play a lot with you. I play a lot with all my friends that we certainly do Lookout Sir with, for example. So yeah, I find it very easy to just kind of because I kind of understand how you're going to do it and what you're going to prioritize and how you're going to think about it. So I always sort of wibble in, which is fine. But no, on the whole, it was good. I had a good time. I enjoyed it. I'm excited for the 40k doubles in April. I'm actually kind of really infused about the idea of this army that we're working on, but we can talk about that another time. But yeah, no, honestly, I think, again, the team at Warhammer World do a great job. I think the quality of the terrain for Age of Sigmar is exceptional.
So good.
Incredible. Like, really, really strong. And yeah, the quality of the sort of armies in attendance is really good. My only thing, I suppose, really ever with this stuff is always like, it is mad, and it was certainly mad this weekend gone, how busy Warhammer World is becoming these days.
Yeah, like lunchtime on the Saturday. I'm not someone that hates, I'm not particularly averse to crowds. No. I tried going to the store with maybe 10 minutes left before the next game started, and I just gave up. I was like, it's far, far too busy. It's the busiest I've ever seen it in my life. And I was like, I don't want this. I'm just going to go back to my table and wait it out for like a few minutes. And I'll come back later when it's a bit quieter, which never really happened, just because we just didn't seem to have as much free time this time than normal. Normally we get a chance to go around the exhibition centre because that's included in our ticket price. Didn't have any time this time. And that's maybe because our games went, to the clock's end. And then maybe we just had too leisurely a lunch. I don't know.
Yeah, me and Richie managed to finish all our games, bar one, on time. Our game 4 went the distance and didn't finish in its entirety. We called it on Battle Round 4, although we talked out the final conclusion of that.
Did you actually do the talking out of the?
We conceded it. I mean, it was one of those conversations where, fair enough, the guy, the Yorkshire Viking fella, understandably, he wanted to sort of talk out the last battle round because ultimately, it was a really close game. I mean, me and Richie were up by 1 point, and he had played out of his, skin. Well, we had played out of our skin. His army was very strong. It's only because I've played against you so much because he was running very similar lists to you.
It was sort of Nighthaunt with Hex Race, wasn't it? And Flesh Eater Courts with also their cavalry, basically.
Correct, yeah. So I have a lot of experience into that matchup, so I was able to manage and shut down certain things really well. And Richie was just, really amazing in terms of being like a durable base. But yeah, he was very eager to talk it through because he wanted to sort of get the overall score. And it seemed important to him to get as many points out of the game as possible for his overall rankings, which is understandable. People who obviously approach the game competitively definitely, prioritize that. My frustration is, and my difficulty is, I suppose, is that I hate talking through rounds in Age of Sigmar because it's just too random. In like 40k, you can draw some cards and go, can I do that? Can I do this? Can I do that? And it's quite quantifiable because it's a very you go, I go thing, and there's no real interactions beyond saving throws that your opponent can kind of bring to the table, especially if you're not going to charge into any combats. And even if you are charging into combats, you can usually look at the CP pool and make an assertion on what the outcome of that's going to be. Because if your opponent's got 1 CP and you're charging, well, they're not interrupting unless, of course, there's a captain and other variables. But the point is 40k is quite quantifiable. You can tell who's going to win and you can talk it through. I still don't appreciate or approve of that either, but I get it and people do it and I've done it, so whatever. But in AoS, it's like, cool, you move in your movement phase, I'll respond. You shoot in your shooting phase, I'll respond.
Yeah.
You charge in your charge phase. Yeah.
Oh, and you can responding, charging, and then you are alternating. Yeah.
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 I was just going to say, and you roll dice and you whiff. Like, the amount of times in AoS, a certainty of, like, I'm charging in with this guy and he's got 5 attacks, hitting on freeze, wounding on freeze, rend 2, damage 5, and then you just roll 1s and 2s. And you're like, oh, well, that happened. That's AoS through and through, and that's the problem I have with that stuff. It's like when someone wants to sort of talk through rounds with it, I'm like, well, how you can never know what's going to happen. So I try in AoS. I try and do it even less, but.
Yeah, we had a sort of awkward chat with our last opponent in game 5 who wanted to talk it out. So we only got to the end of round 3, which wasn't far at all. And, you know, I don't want to throw them under the bus, but they took a very long time with their turns. They took like 10 minutes just to work out their very first battle tactic because they were sort of talking everything out and all the possibilities before even doing anything. And we did ask them several times to speed up. They said, don't worry, we finish all our games. We were like, oh, okay. And there's like 10 minutes left for our last turn 3. So we sort of rushed through it thinking, well, this is it. And we're calling it. And they were like, oh, but we're going to talk it out right. And we were like, why? The time is done. It was basically a bit of an awkward conversation because they had a lot of their army left and we didn't have much. So, and we were quite far ahead on points, but they felt in those 2 turns that they could score enough points to win.
Oh yeah.
And the end result was if they scored the max they could do, and we were scoring just, you know, what we could do without literally moving anything around, they would win by 1 point. And afterwards I was like, well, I don't think they necessarily would have won because we could have actually done stuff in those turns.
Yeah.
And it became a bit of an awkward conversation.
But I think this is the thing with AoS, right? And again, to be completely clear, as I said, I gave these guys my favourite game vote because I genuinely loved the game. The 4 rounds that we played were exceptional. It was so much fun. I literally loved it. And then at the end, when we tried to talk it through, it just became that thing where he was like, well, I think I could score 5 or 6. And I was like, cool, well, I think the same. Because the problem is like, how do you know? And that's the thing.
Yeah. Exactly. So, you know, in the end, we sort of conceded and was like, look, just you take the points that you want and, you know, we don't care. Like, because Sean was getting a bit riled up by it. So we were just like, let's just end this as quick as possible rather than having to call a judge over it. But it was a bit of a sort of a sour note to the end of the game. Like, if we had deliberately slow played them to eke out a win, that would have been an awful thing to do. And it's like, that wasn't happening. It felt more on them that, you know, they were playing their very best optimal turns by taking the lion's share of the time, and we were conscious of time and therefore rushing our turns slightly. But their tactic was to always sort of, you know, come back from behind in their last few turns. But we still had quite a bit on the table. We had 1 unit of Hex Wraiths, admittedly only had like two models in, I think. But you know, with some rallies, it's fine. And then we had Prince Vordry, who's like 400 odd points, and he barely had any wounds taken on him. So I still feel like with that, all we needed to do was deny them a battle tactic or sit on one of the key objectives for 1 turn, and then we would have won. So I don't think that was in the realms of impossibility. It wasn't like we were tabled, in which case I would be like, cool, we can talk it out quite straightforward. And then speaking to a couple of other players, it feels like a lot of people do talk it out, which is gaming the system, because we didn't do that in any of our other... I think there was maybe one other game we didn't get to, you know, the end of the turns. And if you are talking it out, then you're maximising your points, which go towards your... you know, your faction award. Yeah. And then people that don't, because they're playing by the letters of the, you know, the tournament pack, which says once the clock finishes, that's your turn. You don't do another turn because, you know, and they don't really say don't talk it out, but that's pretty much implied by the don't play any more turns. So I sort of feel like people playing by the rules are being penalised. It's sort of like doping in, you know, cycling, right? It's a known secret that everyone does it, because if you don't, you're just a mug and you're just not going to win ever because everyone else is doing it. And it feels like talking it out is the 40k equivalent. So I sort of feel
equivalent, I suppose, in this instance.
Yeah, I guess. So I sort of feel like that's something that, you know, needs to be standardised amongst players.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the thing I would say is, I mean, it's obviously a bit rubbish that in your situation it became more of a negative. I think in the case of like my game where we talked it through, I think it was a very positive experience for the whole in terms of that we came to kind of an alignment. I think there was some initial, what's the best word for it? Some initial confusion that I wasn't immediately willing to talk it out because, like I say, when it comes to AoS, I'm not super keen on it. But truth be told, I felt really bad about that because I thought to myself, you know what, actually, it's worth playing along and not being difficult because I don't want to be difficult and I don't want the guy to come away thinking, oh, I had to play against someone who didn't want to, talk it out. Like, I don't want to be...
Language, Dan.
I think that's within the acceptable parameters. Are you not? Are you saying no to arse? I think arse is fine.
No, you said the full word.
What?
Yeah. Well, no, you said it a second time.
That's fine.
No, it's not.
That is within the acceptable limits. If you put that into, like, I don't know, the BBFC
Come on,
age rating
Dan.
board.
We're obviously got to stop it now anyway. But that's
No, we're not stopping it now. I'm saying it's fine. I'm drawing a line. I will consult the BBFC. It's in the. It's
well,
within
you get one swear word if it's an American movie, but also
That's it.
we're kid friendly, Dan. We're kid friendly.
Oh, you get one in an American movie. You get, and you can say as much as you want. Anyway, the point is, Phil, I'm going to bleep all that out. It's fine. We're going to leave it in for comedic effect. The point is that I can't even remember now. You threw me off. Anyway, I didn't want to be the naughty boy.
That guy, yes.
Yeah, the naughty boy that created a problem. And, to be fair, he was there with his kid as well. And it was a lovely game. And that was the thing. So it was cool. It was fine. The problem always is with it, though, is in AoS. It's like, well, I'm up a point, right? So the current score is 28-29 to me and Richie. You're going to tell me that you can score 10. So I'm going to do the same. And how are you going to prove me otherwise? You know what I mean? It's like literally
and if it's very obvious in terms of what's left on the table, otherwise you're sort of going, well, cool, I'm going to move here and do some stuff and not really interact with you. It seems to be how people do it. But as you say, it's all very vague and nebulous and not at all accurate. So it's just a way of you both getting more points, which feels like rigging the game. Ultimately, and if the result doesn't change, like that's less of an issue, I think, because ultimately, weirdly for most tournaments, your victory points, are maybe a draw decider. It's not the main thing you're being scored on. Whereas weirdly in this tournament, you are for at least one of the awards.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting set of variables. I think this is the thing. It's sad that you had a bad experience with it, and it's a bit rubbish. And I'm sure, if the people you played against are listening to this, I'm sure we don't want to sort of throw anyone a bus or be rude about anyone in particular. And we understand, right? Like people.
No, I don't have any bad feelings about it. I felt like I was sort of caught unawares that was their intention, and if they had sort of said it from the very beginning, or even at the last battle round, it's like I played out the last battle round assuming we weren't doing any more turns. Yeah. So technically, I would have positioned myself much better, knowing that we're going to talk out the last two turns.
Well, exactly, because you were playing to a set of parameters that you understood to be the case. But that's always that's always the thing. And again. Yeah, there just seems to be the sweeping assertion, but I do agree with you. I think it's a blight on the game. I think ultimately, get your turns in. If you don't get your turns in, well, that's it. Call it a day.
But part of me is like, there's a skill in playing quickly to the clock, and that is part of the game. And it's like, if you don't finish your game, that's kind of on you, or you and your opponents, right? It's like you've both got to play quickly enough to... And to me, that's the motivator of not talking it out, right? It's like, if you want to score the maximum points you possibly can, you need to be very quick in your turns to make sure you play the full 5 rounds. You can't play 3 or 4 and then bolt on an extra one just because you want the extra points. It's like, that's your fault for being a slow player. And I say this as someone that can be quite a slow player at times.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, in complete transparency, I think in the game 4 that we ended up running long, I can't say for sure who was the slow player, because it didn't feel like either of us were slow playing.
Sometimes there's just a lot of dice to roll, and quite often, like at least with Nighthorn, I know especially, we can be in combat turn 1 quite easily. So you're rolling dice and lots of dice right from the first battle round, and that slows the game down indefinitely. And also, I think quite a few times, and we did it in a few of our games, and I try to avoid it in the later ones, is you want to be polite and you want to talk you through your army and explain all the gimmicks, especially if they've not played against your faction before, and you want to explain the heroic trait and the artifact, and that eats up like 20 minutes if all four of you are doing that. And sometimes I'm just, I think the last few games, not the last one, but the one before, I think we were like, oh yeah, cool, let's just do stuff, because we all kind of knew what stuff everyone was doing vaguely, and I think that saved you so much more time.
I always say that to my opponents.
Thing.
I always say it to my opponents, I'm going like, I will explain what's in my army if you want me to. I don't care what's in yours. And then they kind of sometimes can get annoyed by the fact they say I don't care. But then so I've had to try and modify the language around it, where I'm going, just so you know, I won't retain what you tell me, so don't tell me.
Well,
and then they go, no, yeah, but I still want to...
That is the case. Yeah. I find it like you get some initial points and then it's all word salad and my brain just can't process it at all. And Sean even mentioned that to me. He's like, yeah, it just goes over my head after a while. And quite often it's noisy. You can't really hear them. Often during deployment, that's when I'll say, okay, what's the movement of this? Or how punchy is this? Or how killy is it in combat or from shooting? What's the threat range of stuff? I'll ask them those often during deployment, because then that's when I actually need to take that knowledge and do something with it in terms of my deployment to counter.
Yeah, but I do think as well in AoS, I think they've done a really good job of conveying through the miniatures and the rules what stuff is. Like, you never feel overly surprised. Like, if something's super bulky and covered in armor, it's probably got a 3-up save. If it's slender wearing a vest, it's probably got a 6-up save. It's like normally, if it's slender, has a bit of armor on it, it's maybe a 4-up save with 2 wounds. If it's bulky with loads of armor on it, it's a 3-up save with 3 wounds or something. Like, the language, or the relationship is a lot easily understood. And it's like, if it's cavalry, when it charges, it's probably going to be better. Yeah. There's all these sort of things that kind of immediately become clear. But yeah, like, I think that's the thing. Ultimately, I and again, it's not that I don't care. It's just like I said, I just can't retain it. And like, people start saying stuff at me and it's like, it's gone. But then they worry it, don't they? They worry so much because they don't want to sort of do you dirty. They don't want to sort of turn around to you at one point and go like, aha, I've done a thing. And you go, well, I wish you told me about that. And then it's like, because I imagine a lot of people respond that way. But to me, I'm like, okay, good. And I always say to my opponents, it's like, look, if you really want to cheat, please do, because I don't care that much. Like, if you really want to win that badly, go nuts.
Yeah, I mean, there was 1 or 2 times where... because I don't mind if someone's like, I forgot to do this thing. Can I do it now? And often it doesn't really impact on the flow of the game. It's like, might do in terms of, I can do some mortal wounds to you on the charge, and now it's the combat. And actually, if I'd killed one of your guys, maybe I would have been taking less damage in return. And it's like, I'll happily do the roll. But, I don't want to take the whole combat sequence back, because that's, that was my fault for forgetting. But there were sometimes where, we're redeploying, for example, after someone's moved and then they've sort of changed their mind about where they wanted to position something. And I'm like, okay, but you're sort of only really doing that because you've now seen I want to redeploy that unit. So I sort of feel like those moments you do need to, stick to. But we were polite enough and be like, yeah, cool, right. If you want to do it, like, go ahead. Like, we're just playing as it is.
I mean, I personally, I could never, I would almost never take back something based on information revealed. Like, if I had made a decision and then my opponent goes, aha, I would be, all right, that's fine. And I know it makes me sound like, I'm so great. Obviously, I have tizzes. Obviously, I get wound up about stuff. Obviously, I have moments. I'm a human being playing a game of small toy soldiers. I have a certain amount of isms that I have to wrestle with, but I also try my best to be sort of decent about it. But I think some people maybe, have more kind of extreme reactions to that stuff. And that's not to say that I'm perfect all the time, because I'm definitely not. And I definitely have moments, and I definitely will have opponents that will have come away from this weekend going, oh God, that guy, what a nightmare. And that's fine. That's part of the course. The problem is you enter into a social contract with a stranger to play a game of small toy soldiers where you both agree to a series of, rules that are only applicable if you both agree that they are, and ultimately the kind of social contract and overall kind of, mental, physical construct that holds that together is very, very obtuse, and ultimately, things will go wrong along the way. So you just got to try your best, and that's always what I try and do. I fail probably more than I succeed, but I continue to try and do better. And that's always how I sort of look at it. But yeah, it's 40k. Oh, sorry, it's Age of Sigmar in this case. It's Warhammer, whatever. It's fun. Yeah. We should probably, rather than just whinging about weird interactions, I've sort of said how my games went. By the way, I took Skaven. I took Shooty Skaven. Mm-hmm. Horrible army. I hated myself. No wonder I didn't get any favourite game votes. When someone moves anywhere, I go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pick up 18 dice, I'm going to roll them, and whatever the cumulative value of those 18 dice is, that's how many shots I've got, which on average was about 65 to 70. So
which is insane, right?
Which is insane. Now I'm going to roll 70 dice. Oh, what's that? I'll use 40k terminology. The sustain hit 1. Oh, that's good. So you roll all these dice, and after you're done with it, you basically turn around to your opponent and go, oh, there you go. You've taken 30 wounds. And they go, yay, it's my turn, and I've taken 30 wounds. I'll roll my saves. Oh, it's dead. And you're like, yeah, this is fun. It's a horrible, oppressive unit. I love it because it's super powerful and super lame and the exact sort of crazy game-winning combo that you need. But it is definitely abusive and a little bit over the top. And I think from a design perspective, from a rules writing perspective, GW could definitely have done better in terms of making that a more streamlined experience, because it is not only irritating because it's really powerful, it's irritating because it's extraordinarily tedious to watch the person do it.
Yeah.
So I think it fires
especially because you're doing D6 shots per model.
3 D6 shots per model.
Oh God. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a lot. If it was just like a flat 2 and you knew where you were, or even a flat 5, right, in that example, it would still take a long time, but the rolling the dice and calculating does take a while, and we had an opponent with the same one. I played a lot of Skaven. For context, obviously I had my Nighthorn with loads of Hex Wraiths, and then Sean had Sublight Gravelords with the
Blood Knights.
The Blood Knights. I was thinking Black Knights, but they're the skeleton ones. But Blood Knights and Bordrai, who's the named character on Zombie Dragon, and that was he had a unit of 10 knights, and that was it. So, which were pretty terrible most games, to be honest, until the last game where we had this hilarious moment. So, Sean is known for being an awful dice roller, and he just can't roll anything to save his life. And then in the last game, he accidentally dropped some dice, and the roll was incredible. So I was like, just keep that up. So he just did this hand drop, mic drop, equivalent of his dice, and they sort of scattered everywhere, but they were all 5s and 6s. So we perfected the technique to he drop it into a little box lid. So they were at least contained, and his dice rolling just markedly improved in that last game. It was incredible. And that was the most funniest moment in the whole tournament, basically, that he suddenly learned how to roll dice by just dropping them.
He has since 3D printed some kind of funnel, hasn't he?
Yeah, so that is I think it was our last opponent had that actually. It's a shipping container for 40k that is a sort of dice sorter. So you just chuck in the dice to the top, and it outslots rows of 5 dice at a time, so it's quite good for quickly counting your dice. So yeah, he 3D printed one of those because he saw it in action with our opponent and was like, oh, that's actually really interesting. So yeah, he's got that now, which is good.
There you go. Anyway, yeah, so you were Soulblight Gravelords and Nighthorn. I was Skaven. Richie was Trugs. So basically we had a super durable block of flesh being scurried around by rats that shot a lot. So it wasn't a particularly fun combination for our opponents to play against, which is what it is. But yeah, so that was it. And we did really well. As I say, we won the first 4 games, lost the last one. I think in the ITC scoring system, based on how they did it, I think we came 9th overall.
Yeah, it was 9th for you guys. Yeah, because you were, by the 4th game, you were one of 3 teams that had won all your matches. So,
Yes,
you know,
that's great.
that's pretty good. And if it was like a sort of a win path system, you would have been in the top 3, I guess.
Yeah.
But obviously it
wasn't-
scored it differently. Yeah.
Yeah. But that was that, and then overall we came 40th because of cumulative scores and other things. And there was about 65-ish something teams like that, so about
something like that.
30 players. So yeah, big turnout. Good times all round. Enjoyed it. The Warhammer World events team do well. Very busy, but ultimately enjoyable. Scenery's great. Staff are great. The venue's great. Pepsi Max. Hang on. I actually spoke to the bartender there, not to throw anyone under a bus, but lads, someone needs to put out a petition, maybe we do, for Warhammer World Pepsi Max prices. I'm just going to throw it out there. £3, I'll say £3.50. I think it was £3.80, but £3.50 for
something like that.
For a fountain drink, you know, like one of the flipping, like, you know, like when you go to Nando's and you get the bottomless things. I think if I go to Nando's and I buy like a bottomless Coke, I feel like that's like £4. So like literally 20p less, I get one. It's like,
yeah, it was. I'm pretty sure it was around 15 quid for 4. So it was pricey when I went there and I bought us all drinks on the Friday. And at least with a tea is £2.50, and for every 6-1 or after your 6-1, you get one for free. So it's you get some encouragement with hot drinks.
That's why I was on the flat whites constantly. I was like, I can't be dealing with this. This is insane. To be fair, I imagine, I was having it's one of those January things, isn't it? Keeping it clean. But, like flipping hell. Pepsi Max at £3, whatever it is. Like, that's madness. Like, you know, come on. 180 to 250. Fine.
Yeah.
For over £3 for a soft drink. They're mugging you off, aren't they? Anyway, we'll start that as a petition. Warhammer World, make your Pepsi cheaper.
Yeah.
That's our ask. Absolutely. Yeah. But, you know, according to the guy behind the bar, much as was illustrated by the fact that I was buying it, people pay. So, you know, it's a captive audience.
Yeah, it is a captive audience. You don't really get much choice, I don't think.
Well, that's it. Anyway, yeah. But that's it in terms of things I have to say about that. Tell us about your path to victory, Phil, and then we can end this segment and do something else.
I believe we lost our first game. We played a lot of Skaven. I think it was like 3 teams in total. So, you know, Narholes were the bane of my life. Constantly popping up everywhere. That was a real pain. Yeah, so lost the first game. So I was like, sure, we're on the fun team now. We're going down the bottom of the tables where it's all casual. Then we won our second one, and I was like, "Oh no, we've gotten to the tables where people lost one and won one, and now they want to win again." So I think we lost our third one. I think we then won our fourth, and then lost our fifth. I think pretty much every single game we got double turned. We were constantly made to go first, and we were constantly double turned, and. Not in all the games, but the majority of them. And it seems to be, if you're double turned, that's the thing that swings it for, oh yeah, we're definitely losing now. It seemed to be a bit of a theme.
I think you have to be smart about how you manage the double turn, because you can plan around it. However, I will say that the doubles format, I think, personally, amplifies the efficiency of the armies to the point that the double turn is more impactful.
Putting a heroic trait in an artifact, basically, and you're doubling up on your army abilities, activate in the hero phase and things like that. So, yeah, it did feel like a really big swing every time, and quite often we were doubled on the second turn, like second back round. So it was quite, a key stage of the game when that did happen.
I did notice as well, a lot of people went very alpha strikey with it. Like, they just had armies that were built around hit hard and hit fast. And yeah, I think that was happening quite frequently. Me and Richie kind of built a list that was kind of intended around the idea of giving away the second turn and going first. And we had strategies to deal with that. And again, they worked very well up until they didn't, which was game 5. But yeah, it is what it is at the end of the day. It's, GW still continue to do more to try and balance that mechanic. And I do think on the whole, double turns are fine in normal 2,000 point games. it's weird, isn't it, right? Because when I'm playing normal 2,000 point one-on-one Age of Sigmar, the double has an impact, but it doesn't feel that impactful. Whereas in the doubles, it felt like, God, yeah, these are meaningful. So I do think there's something to the synergy that changes it, because people were bringing efficiency in a way that sort of amplifies the offering.
And it could be not just it's the synergy of the two armies together as well, quite often, in addition to the extra sort of tactics and stuff that you can do with the heroes and warlord traits and things like that. It was definitely an interesting one to see. And even in our last game, we were so ahead on points, they got to double and still do a battle tactic. And I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, if you're 6 points under, which they were, they still got to do it, which is sort of one of the reasons why I got to catch up slightly in the last turn. And I was like, oh, okay.
There you go. But on the whole, look, genuinely, sincerely encourage those of you who haven't to give Warhammer World events a go. They are expensive, and presumably if you're not near...
And they sell out very quick as well.
Oh, God, the 40k one that we're going to, I mean, like, fair play to Richie. He played it a blinder getting tickets for that one. But, they sell out quickly. They're expensive. The weekend is expensive, right? Like, I mean, hotel rooms, travel, food, everything. It all adds up, like, you do spend a lot on it. We like to look at it as, like, for me, it's like my kind of quarterly... or maybe sort of free time a year kind of weekend away with my friends and things. And I kind of, it's kind of like one of those things because they're sort of like big kind of weekend events for me that I sort of really build up to. So as much as it is expensive, I kind of spread out like the pain, I suppose. But yeah, I think ultimately they're great events and they're good fun. And the guys who run it are a great team. The venue's amazing. The boards, at least in terms of AoS, are really strong. I can't really speak to 40k because I've not been to a Warhammer World 40k event since 2023. So this next one in April is going to be the first one we've gone to, or I've gone to anyway, for 40k in a while. So I'm really excited, actually. I think it's going to be a super fun one. So I'm really keen to kind of get into that and get going with that one. And I think, having the recent experience of this AoS one, I think it's going to help frame how I kind of approach the 40k one, because I think I'm going to be a lot more kind of like, whatever. Because,
right. Yeah.
Because let's be honest, Phil, your and my army is probably not going to be that good.
No.
Although, to be fair, it depends how many wardens you take, I suppose.
1 unit of 5, because that's what I've got.
Fine. There you go. So there we are. They're our MVPs, basically. They're the ones that need to do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
There you go. They're certainly not going to be your bike squad.
No, I was thinking about leaving those behind, to be honest. As much as I think they look cool, which they certainly do, I think
you have to bring them for that alone, though, mate.
Maybe.
You've got to think about the wow factor,
That's true.
I think what you have to judge it on is, let's see how Valdor turns out in the paint job when they've got them done. And we can make an evaluation whether we're going for cool points or whether we're just accepting that I'm a weak link and let the theme down.
Let the team down. Okay, we'll see how we get on.
Yeah, exactly. But if I can paint him up well, you can look at it and go, oh, all right then. Let's not worry about optimal army and just go for cool points.
Fair.
Because I think it should be good. I mean, I think the combination of Valdor leading Dark Angels, or Angels of Death as they will be known, alongside Thunder Warriors, I think it should hit the ground, I reckon.
Yeah, should be a good thing.
Well, we'll see. I've got to, as I say, I'm going to do my best to try, Phil. For you, I will try.
I appreciate it.
Exactly. Oh, really amazing, though. I mean, imagine, Phil, you and me winning a Best Painted award. Could you imagine? Would you ever imagine that was possible?
I mean, I still can't, to be honest.
No, I can't either, to be fair. You always get overlooked. Your stuff always looks terrible from a distance. That's the problem.
Yeah, quite likely.
I'm joking. Your stuff always looks amazing. It's always that thing, isn't it? Like, I can't believe you didn't get nominated this time. What happened?
I sort of understand it. I think while we had a great theme and there was great colour, sort of synergy, I just don't think either of ours are painted to as high a standard as some of the others on in the cabinet. I mean, to be fair, it was definitely higher than one or two of them, but a lot of them had tons of conversion work in a sort of very obvious way. And I sort of say this, like, Sean's army is beautiful, but hasn't, I don't think, really got any conversion work in it at all. Mine has a ton, but you don't necessarily realise it unless you appreciate how dated the old Hexstrafe kit is. And then you might go, oh yeah, these aren't them, but they just look like Nighthaunt, riding horses. So if you didn't know that, yeah, you'd just be like, oh yeah, these are just the normal kits probably.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, look, anyway, there we go. That was a bunch of chat about an AoS Doubles that we did. Hopefully you enjoyed it. A little bit of drama in there. I said some naughty words. Bad me. But there you go. That's that. Thanks very much. Cheers very much to Warhammer World for putting on a cracking event, even though it's expensive. But, that is what it is. You know what you're signing up for, and it was enjoyable. And that's it, really. Excited for the next one. Transitional noise. All right, that's the end of whatever number episode that is. I can't remember because I can't remember. I think it's 197, isn't it?
That sounds about right, yeah.
There we go. All right, that's the end of episode 197. But it's the outro, everybody. A fine time where me and Phil recount things that are occurring in and around our lives and hobby that aren't segment-worthy, but interesting in their own right. I bought a PC today, Phil. I'm upgrading to be able to edit better and also play video games.
Lovely. Lovely.
That's how that goes. But other than me spending, money on things, did you see, Phil, Astartes 2? Woo!
Yes, I did. About time, and then it's still not coming out for another year.
Yeah, I have to be honest with you. Like, what an absolute kick in the nether regions.
Yes.
Like, my God. Like, yeah, when all of that finishes and it goes like, 2026, you're like, oh my God, it's so long away.
I know. It's sort of, it was a bit odd because obviously you see that at the end, and then they say, oh yeah, all of this stuff isn't in the actual animation itself. This is this is just flashbacks to what they were up to. And then if you look at Astartes 1, the majority of, not all of it, I don't think, but the majority of those scenes are actually taken from that end clip, where it was the preview of Astartes 2, and it's like they've just recycled a bunch of it. So, yeah, obviously some of it is new, but it's like, it does make you wonder how much of Astartes 2 has been developed already. Are they only like halfway done? At what point, I'd be really interested to know at what point did they actually properly, under Games Workshop, start Astartes 2? It feels like it's only been maybe the last year or so.
Yeah, look, I think, like, Astartes 2 is one of those interesting ones, isn't it? That, it's been such a long time coming. It's such a beloved part of the overall franchise. The work that was done on the original was truly breathtaking, stunning. Absolute tragedy that they took it off YouTube. I still can't get my head around that, although I think they've since
it's
made
come back.
It available for free via their Warhammer channels. There was a whole thing they did about it years ago, but whatever. The point is Astartes was truly, not revolutionary, I suppose, but truly impactful in terms of what it did for the perception of the Warhammer 40,000 and Space Marine IP. I think it was hugely popular, very successful, lovely stuff all round. And, this trailer does an extraordinary job of kind of hitting those key points. What I love about how this individual, and I assume now that they're going to have more than just themselves working on it, but it wouldn't surprise me. It's just the ability to kind of frame shots and craft action sequences and showcase the kind of raw brutality of it in such a kind of smooth and compelling way. Like the sequence where the Blood Angel jump pack geezer is just kind of like aggressively filling up a corridor as it flies down it with like unfettered fury, as it were. It's just stunning. It's like, or even the sequence where the Green Marines, I think those are the Aurora Marines, maybe? I don't know if that's what they are. But anyway, the point is they're there and they're predator tanks driving down the road, shooting stuff off the side. And
that
it's
one
like,
looks really good.
it's just so evocative. So, like, even the bit where the guy's, like, smashing, I think it was an orcs.
Yeah,
like,
the orcs up, yeah.
And he sort of, like, bashes one of them back and starts punching them into a wall and then gets... I can't remember if this is two different sequences, but there's one where the orcs mob one of them and start, like, kicking him in on the floor and stuff. And it's like, oh, this is... Yeah, it's just something so, like, real about it. It feels... It feels heavy and it just, I love it. It's just so cool. I just think that guy, like, I mean, in a way, he's probably wasted on Warhammer 40,000, but I mean, I love it. I just think it's incredible, and I can't wait to see what he actually does with it because I think it's so cool.
Yeah, because he posted a sort of a show reel or sizzle reel, I think it's called, at the same time, featuring Astartes 2, featuring the Amazon Prime secret level, because he worked on that as well, and also some of his own stuff, which he's been doing. And then it was like, support me on Patreon for my personal projects, which I think is the other stuff that you saw in that little clip. So I think from what I've heard is that he did a lot of, I don't want to say like keyframe animation, but he was doing a lot of the initial like sort of layouts and storyboard, I think, for the secret level stuff. So he's sort of working out how they're moving, framing it and stuff like that. And then I presume maybe some slightly more dog's body people are doing the actual animation work, because obviously it's a team effort.
That's a nice thing to say about the people who've worked hard to get their career in animation.
Well, there's always someone at the bottom doing the grunt work. That's the real time. Here's the thing: everything to do with animation is quite time consuming. But there's the person that's sort of setting it up, and then there's the person doing the harder work. Which, if you don't want to call it dog's body work, that's fine. But it's
That's probably what it is. But, the Starters 2, well, cool. Well done them. They've done well. Cracking looking thing. Can't wait. I saw in the comments someone say, now it's their life goals, stay alive to see.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah, that was quite accurate.
Absolutely. You're going to have to reconsider that, trip to the Congo you were considering, Phil.
I know, yeah. The cure for AIDS will have to wait.
Exactly. How are you? Anyway, let's not go down that road. Let's leave that alone. So Starters 2's looking cool. I don't know what else really. I mean, Elder are going to be probably something we talk about in the next thing. A lot of people getting on the internet kicking up a stink about Elder being broken. Oh, they're broken, Phil.
They always are,
God,
Dan. That's the whole point about them. One,
they always are. Two, everything in 40k is. Like, that's how they balance the game. Like, I was playing it the other day going, God, everything in this game is very good at doing what it wants to do. Like, it feels to me like many of the things that people are saying are broken about Elder can be circumnavigated by just a few like unit choices. Like, there are definitely things that they don't want to see on the other end of the board, but obviously it's how that then kind of folds into an overarching meta and how you kind of use those units in other matchups. But it's fair to assert that like Elder are definitely going to have hard matchups and they're definitely going to struggle with certain things. But it's also fair to say that they're very, very good at killing stuff. But then I feel like in 40k, everything's good at killing stuff. So I just sort of, I don't know. And obviously right now we've not seen the points on it. But I don't know, there just seems to be a lot of clickbait doing the rounds of people going, oh, it's broken. And it's like, well, yeah, of course it is. It's Elder. What do you want from them?
Yeah.
I don't know. When has Elder not been broken, in your opinion, Phil?
Never.
Yeah, well, in my opinion, they weren't broken in 5th edition.
Yeah, I wasn't playing it then. So.
Well, that's what I'm telling you. In 5th edition, basically because they had a 4th edition codex that was quite old, throughout 5th edition, they weren't broken. They still had some broken options, but they weren't broken. And then 6th edition came along and they went, oh, would you like a Wraith Knight? And then from there on in, basically, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th edition, they've been a horrible miss.
I think Index 8th edition was the first time I was actually beating Elder armies. So that period they were fine for, because that's when Wraith Knights were quite terrible and everyone was still running them.
Yeah, fair. I think, I don't know, even then I think they still had some reasonable builds, but yeah. There was a time when the codex for Elder dropped in 8th edition where people were like, it's a terrible codex, and then literally like 2 weeks later they were winning every tournament under the sun.
Yeah, that is funny when people say that.
Well, that's how they react though, isn't it? And again, things will shift and change, and who knows? I'm excited to review it though. I mean, I love Elder. I think they're an incredible faction with a deep and interesting lore. I think it's interesting that GW have now started teasing the Shining Spear Phoenix Lord. I think that's cool. They're also talking about the Shadow Spectre Phoenix Lord as well. So there's an assertion that Shadow Spectres will be getting their own kind of GW kit, which I think would be super cool.
Is that a unit?
Yes, so sorry, that's an Aspect Warrior squad that is currently only available through Forge World.
Those ones. Okay, yeah, I doubt they'd be available anymore.
No, I think they've probably been discontinued. Perfect time for me to sell my boxed versions of them on. In fact, actually, I probably should put those up on eBay. Anyway, because I even have the Unit Exarch, which is quite hard to come by. So there you go. Anyway, so no, that's interesting. And again, they have confirmed, and it is basically out there, that Karandras, the Shadow Hunter, is removed. My speculation was accurate, Phil. He's not in it.
What a surprise.
I know. Shocker. I don't know for sure, actually. I'll have to confer with the internet, but I also think my prediction of Illidan and Yuri will prove correct. I think both of those have gone also.
Oh. Yeah, I guess it depends if they're metal or not, or if they're going to get rid of them.
Well, metal / Finecast.
Yeah, well, so far it seems like metal models tend to stick around still, and Finecast have just gone, and that this edition is all about getting rid of Finecast stuff.
In my experience, it tends to be, are they Space Marines? Yes or no? If they're Space Marines, we'll keep them. If they're anything else, they can go. Although, weirdly, the Blood Angels didn't get that treatment, because both Tycho and Corbelo, both of those went. So,
yeah, I think some of the Katachan characters went. I'm waiting on confirmation. I can't remember which one though. But I think one or two has stayed, and definitely one, if not a second, has also left. Yeah, there's a few, which is a shame, because obviously they're trying to diversify the range and make Katachan more of a thing. But obviously they have a slightly more legacy army now, out of the sort of the three core factions that are making up Astra Militarum at the moment.
Well, indeed. I was just checking on the internet, Phil, and we'll go back to the three core factions in Guard. I was trying to work out how old the Ezekiel model was, because Ezekiel, the Dark Angel Librarian, I think he came out in like 97, so he now might be a contender, Phil, for one of the oldest kits still. Although I don't think you can still buy Ezekiel from Games Workshop. I just know he happens to be in the book. But he might now actually be the oldest single miniature still supported in the game.
In 40k?
In Warhammer 40,000.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think AoS has got some much older ones.
Oh, probably. But, like, what do you think is older in AoS?
Things like Corpse. Wait, and what tape were you
Corpse
saying?
got 97.
Oh, actually, no, that is quite old. Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Because I think
there have been some really old models in AoS, but most I think they've gotten rid of all the metal ones now. Yeah,
because like Space Wolves don't really have any minis in their range that are older than the year 2000. I mean, essentially, yeah, they updated Najal and all those guys in kind of mid to late 2000s.
What about things like the sort of the Falcon and the Wave Serpent?
Falcon, I want to say, came out in like 98, 99. Because they were like plastic kits. I think they were sort of 98, 99 time. Ezekiel, I think, might be... and even Captain Sicarius or whatever it was for the Ultramarines, I think he came out in like the mid 2000s as well as a mini. So I think Ezekiel's the front runner.
Yeah, I think whatever the Katachan one still survives might also be a retro mini, because that would be metal.
Which catch are we talking though? What, the plastic squad or the?
No,
'cause that came out in,
the metal,
1999.
the metal characters like Sergeant Harkin, or I think he's the one that's left. So it's the I can't remember the name of the.
Yeah, I feel like those were.
lieutenant.
I feel like those were 2000s again. Like, because those were. Yeah,
the late
I think
90s or early 2000s. Yeah, that sort of period.
Yeah. I think like the Iron Arm Shraken and the Harkers, I think they came in the 5th edition book in
Right.
2000 times. So, yeah. There you go. An interesting mental exercise. Let us know if you know the oldest or the oldest miniature that there are rules for in Warhammer 40,000. In the mainline product, we're not talking Legends here, obviously.
Yeah, I would say more what Games Workshop sells. That's still the oldest mini.
Well, in which case, then Ezekiel's probably out of the running because I swear they don't sell him anymore.
Right, okay.
Anyway, doesn't matter. Yeah, what were you saying, Phil, again, about the three key factions? Your Death Korps of Krieg, your Catachans, and your Heavy Arms?
Yeah, so obviously I think out of those three, the Catachans are now sort of a legacy older one, but they're still sort of promoting it and still trying to keep it going, yet getting rid of some of the characters, which I feel like in the new codex, so that's a bit of a shame. But there are still one or two.
One or two, just a few.
You know, still got to hold out for whenever that codex is going to come to actually find out for sure.
Well, I presume it can't be that far away, can it?
I mean, you would have thought it'd be soon. I assume what they're doing is they're doing Elder next, and then it'll be interesting to see if the generic guard codex comes out after that, or if there be something else in between.
Well, yeah, it has to. They've got to do generic guard release before they do Emperor's Children, surely.
I mean, you'd think so, but sometimes they do like to leave it a bit of time between the limited edition box set and the generic release.
That's fair.
I still find it quite interesting that, you know, Elder didn't get a limited edition box and that they just had, here's everything in a general release for you.
Yeah, it's quite nice. I mean, you know, a limited edition box would have been cool, I guess, but then that would have represented some discounted value. And the thing is, I think Elder players are passionate enough that they can be milked dry.
Yeah, because they've literally not had any of this stuff in forever. Probably in your lifetime, if you're young enough, you've never had a new Elder model.
Well, that's not true.
It depends on how young you are.
Well, I mean, yeah, fair enough. If you're 1 year old, then there hasn't been a new Elder model in your lifetime.
Okay, fair. I retract my statement.
Yeah, no, they did. When was the last new Elder model?
Well, no, they did a whole range of releases last year, didn't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, 23. They did the 9th edition book where they did a new Altark, new Guardians, new Shining Spears. Yep. Like, they did loads. They even gave them new Rangers, and they gave them a whole new Ranger unit in the form of Rangers on jetbikes.
Yeah.
So they've had loads. They did Corsairs. I think Corsairs actually were last year, potentially.
Maybe.
Or maybe the year before. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is that, yeah, they've always... But again, like, the thing about Elder is they had this kind of weird situation where there were the haves and the have-nots, and now you have the situation where the aspect warriors were looking really out of whack. But yeah, I mean, right now, I mean, they still have some older units. Like, definitely the Falcon kit is showing its years. The Viper kit is very old now. Not Ezekiel old, but probably kind of like 98 kind of time.
Right.
The Viper jet bike, Phil, was released the same timeline as the first metal, or rather hybrid kit for the attack bike. And I know this because they did in the White Dwarf with the Viper artwork on the cover. Beautiful artwork, by the way. And that's another piece of classic Warhammer art that I'd love to get a print of. Anyway, they had the Viper artwork on the cover of White Dwarf. And in there was a back report basically pitting these two new kind of heavy bike things against each other. The Elder Viper versus the attack bike.
Wow.
And since then, they've at least had a fully plastic version of that attack bike, and then turned it into ATV.
Yeah.
So, a lot can happen. Anyway, yeah, so there we go. You working on any fun personal projects at the moment, buddy? What's on your plate?
Mine has pivoted to Age of Sigmar at the moment. So obviously we're at Warhammer World, which we talked about. But when I was there, I did a not a cheer me up purchase because I did it straight away on Saturday morning, basically. No, Friday even. So as soon as we got there, I went off to the shop and I bought 2 models. One of them was the White King on skeletal steed.
Strong choice.
What do I have here? This one, the classic mini. I thought I would.
This is the outro, mate. We don't do the video on this. But,
well, people can just imagine. I could be picking my nose this whole time. If only I'd have known.
Exactly.
So
it's very polite of me not to mention that's what you're doing. Although I worry. I think when we were recording the AoS Doubles segment, there was one point where I kind of rubbed my nose in a kind of sort of almost looked like I was kind of picking it sort of way. So I wonder how that'll come out in post-production.
True. Anyway, yeah, so I picked it up because it sold out from Games Workshop, and I was eyeing up Element Games, and I was like, oh, well, I'm here, I'll just buy it. And I also picked up the Black Library Vampire because I was like, well, that just happened to be there, so I like the look of him, so I picked him up as well. So I've been going this week on the Soul Blight Gravy train. Keep saying Gravy train. I'm just on the bandwagon. That's it, the bandwagon for Soul Blight. So basically, I've been building Curse City because I've had that in my loft for literally years since it first came out, and I was like, well, I can just use some of this for an army. So I've been doing that basically. I'm most of the way there because it's quite quick to build. I realised I had some old battle wizards from Fantasy that I bought in first edition AoS. No, they're on square bases, so I think they always came on square bases. I think I picked them up as characters for Warhammer Quest one time. Anyway.
Well, don't forget, Phil, I mean, when Age of Sigmar first launched, it fully supported square bases.
Yes, no, that is true. But I can't remember exactly when I bought it. I think it was maybe even been prior to Age of Sigmar, I think. So I've had them on my person for a while, and I was like, one of these I can convert into a necromancer. So I've converted one into a necromancer. I also had my my vampire that I made for Mordheim. So I've rebased her onto a slightly bigger base because instead of a 32mm base, she needs to be on a 40 for AoS. So I've done that. So I've realised I've got I already own a lot of vampire stuff that could make an army. Technically, I also have a corpse cart, missing the corpses. So I need to maybe find some corpses to make that.
Go on a killing spree.
Yes, an actual killing spree. I've also got Baladama, but I'm sort of missing a wolf and a rock, so I don't know if I could be bothered to make her or not, because I basically bought her and her and the corpse cart for other conversion projects, basically. So I've been doing that. So yeah, hopefully when the Death Rattle stuff comes out for the new Sublight Gravelords that I'll be getting then. That's the sort of the main intention, to be the mainstay of the army. And in the meantime, I'm just building my Curse City stuff up because there's some cool bits in that. The Vikos Bloodborne are really cool models. They all seem a bit terrible. But yeah, I'm quite happy to build those up and paint them all. And it's a bit of a shame. There's some really cool minis in Curse City that don't make the transition to the AoS army. So there's the rat swarms and the bat swarms that would be really fun to have as little units, or I don't know, gaming tokens or something. But they're just not used at all, which is a bit of a shame.
Well, you could totally use them as tokens for something, though, right?
Yeah,
there's an option in there, surely.
Yeah,
I can't think off the top of my head what that would be, but I'm sure
there are lots of debuffs you can do, for like -1 to wound, -1 damage, things that come from spells and stuff. So potentially I could use it to represent those. But there are also sort of like objective marker type stuff which are like skeletons hanging and stuff like that. So maybe those would be more appropriate to be like those kind of little markers, because they're effectively like actual signposts in the game, I think. So yeah, that'd be quite interesting. So I've been doing that. That's been really fun. They fit together like a dream in comparison to the Nighthaunt stuff. They're fiddly, but they're still robust, and they don't have really annoying seam lines like all the Nighthaunt stuff do. So, yeah, I feel like I've made a good pick.
Good on you, mate. I myself have been playing a bunch of Warhammer 40,000 again in preparation for Beachhead. The weekend this episode releases, whatever. I'll be in Bournemouth TOing, judging Warhammer 40,000. I think we've ended up with like 200-something players, so it's going to be a big event. So really excited to see how people come together and enjoy that. I'm going to be taking Imperial Knights with me as a kind of ringer type army, just because it's super easy to run if I need to run an army. But ideally, I won't have to play any games. That's the perfect scenario for me, is playing no games. But we'll see how it goes. Again, I think it's going to be a fun event. I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. Hopefully it's a good weekend. But yeah, putting some time on 40k. Got a pickup game with a buddy of mine from Doing the Club next week. We're going to get some games in, figure it out, make sure that I'm a bit more comfortable, because, again, I've been quite AOS-ified. I'm desperately trying to get hold of or trying to find Legionis Astartes Traitor Champion Consul for my Doubles army. I want the character to rep my Space Marine captain. It's a really beautiful sculpt,
nice.
And I'm desperately trying to get hold of it. Which reminded me, I was in London today. I should have gone to Tottenham Court Road, because they do actually stock and sell.
I can tell you with confidence they don't have much there, because I went a few weeks ago and I was looking for the Solar Auxilia Shanites. I think that's how it's pronounced, Shanites, Ogrins. They readily admitted they didn't have much in. It's a majority big stuff, so warlords and bigger. Effectively, it's all the Titans, basically. There's a couple of upgrade packs, and it's a lot of like Elder and Tau 40k vehicles in there as well. It's sort of like the large white boxes. There's a couple of blisters, but not many, and I don't think many of the characters. Definitely worth checking out, though. But yeah, you might struggle slightly.
Well, here's what it is.
I had a slightly more successful hunt. I was looking for, I think his name was Othar Half-King, who is this White King model that Games Workshop produced last year, predominantly as the Warhammer, I think it's commemorative series.
No, I'm not sure I do remember that.
It's sort of like the one they sort of tag if it's like the Warhammer Fest or the sort of store exclusive ones. Yeah. So apparently, so it's a new AoS White King model. Interestingly, it's styled in the sort of same way as the new Death Rattle Barrow Guard minis. So it's got that sort of more modern look. So I was like, oh, if I could get hold of it. It'd be very cool. He's also got a tiny little, I think he's meant to be skeletal, but he looks like a little Nighthaunt, like little baby Nighthaunt next to him, because he's actually, I think, a character from, what was it called? Role Models, which was the webcomic that Warhammer Community did. Anyway, they've only produced the model in super limited numbers, and they've given them to independent store stockists that are new, that have they've just started stocking AoS 40k stuff, and that's one of the models that they give them in limited quantities, like one or two. A bit like, the I can't remember his name. It was the Sergeant, the Katachan guy that looked like he was from the Predator.
Yeah, I forget the name. I know. I always get confused because they did the lady one called Ripper, didn't they? But I always forget the one.
Yeah, but it was the other guy. Yeah, so. Is a similar sort of system to that, so really hard to get hold of. I found a few online, basically in Europe or Malaysia, that obviously only ship there. But I have a friend who basically has family in Poland, and I managed to order two in Poland to go to someone's house that will be picked up by my friend Ollie, who's going to bring it back with him. So one's going to go to me and one's going to go to Sean, because I know he's a Soulblight Gravelords player. I mean, hopefully it'll happen and it's not like a scam website that I bought it from. But fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed it is a scam website, or that it's not a scam website.
That it's not, and that I actually get it.
I hope that too, for you and Sean.
Yeah,
really.
True, because it's a beautiful model. Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah, if at any point they put it on general release in the next few months with the release of Soulblight Gravelords, I'll be slightly upset. But at the same time, I didn't pay massively over the going price, so it should be fine. You
roll the dice, you take the risks, etc., etc. You know what you're getting yourself in for.
Well, exactly. Yeah, it looked cool, so I was like, let's try and find it if I can.
Exactly, mate. No, I think that's the right shout. No, it should be cool. Yeah. Otherwise, I think working on armies for this doubles, figuring out other things, seeing what's on the horizon. Excited to read the Elder book. Not that I haven't read it already via leaks on the internet, but you're not supposed to say that. But yeah, excited to read it properly, formally. Excited to review it next episode, so hopefully that's an enjoyable experience for people.
I'll have to actually pre-order it because I've forgotten.
Yes, no, make sure you do, mate. Make sure you do. And yeah, I think that's it, really. I think ultimately at the moment, it's all pretty chill. No real particular highlights. I bought, I succumb to the notion of having terrain set up the way that the competitive people tell me to set it up when playing 40k, and on Wayland Games via Deep Cut Studios, bought some of those mat cuts, cut out map pieces to be able to do the layouts properly.
That you then just denoting the area of the terrain, right?
Correct. Yeah.
That's interesting.
So I got some of those. So I'm going to give that a go.
What was interesting is we saw when we were up at Warhammer World, someone with tournament terrain that they had bought and just sort of used.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of surprised no one told them off, but maybe they were in a corner, so maybe no one noticed.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's like one of those things that, ask for forgiveness rather than permission, and most of the time no one ever kicks up a stink. But it was weird. It was weird going into the place and seeing. But again, that's so synonymous with 40k now. Those, hideous MDF pieces of terrain. It's just become the game now for people. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't massively dislike the idea of using mats to denote the footprint and then using nice terrain. I do always feel like it's always going to be slightly kind of not what you're looking for, because really you want to kind of build in raised areas, put some rubble and stuff on it, make it look really nice. But, the reality is that we've long since lost the battle for the collective consciousness of the Warhammer 40,000 player. And, you can't deny the convenience of the mats, even if I feel like they aren't personally the things that really kind of do it for me. The game has kind of now been balanced and built around those concepts, and it's quite difficult or time consuming to come up with solutions that aren't that. So you just end up just sort of going along with it. If you can't beat them, join them. That's kind of the logic I've come to there.
Yeah.
And it was only 20 quid to get those offcuts of mat, and we'll see what they look like. See if they actually enhance the local gameplay experience. And again, the thing that kind of made me not admit defeat, so to speak, but just kind of buy in, is because it's kind of published within the Games Workshop documentation around Pariah Nexus. They're basically in their guide that you download from Warhammer Community, go, here are the terrain layouts we recommend. And you're like, well, if it's coming straight from the actual dev team, I have to just assert this is how they intend it to be played now. So let's stop getting antsy about it and just get on board.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. So on Friday we were doing our doubles test game at Warhammer World, and you just had regular objectives, and I was like, no, Let's use the mats. Let's use the little dishes. And actually, I sort of really don't. I don't mind it in both games, but in AoS it feels much more appropriate because you measuring out the sort of the aura of objective control feels so much more important and tactical in AoS than it is in 40k. 40k it tends to be it feels much more like you're just charging something in, and whoever's won that combat is probably the person that's on the objective. Whereas in AoS, there's so much more sneaky shenanigans you can do to like up your objective control score, or just sort of tag people in and stuff like that. And it feels like, I feel like AoS, especially this weekend, so much more like a movement-based game. That sort of the movement sort of aspect of it it's throughout many different phases of the game is like so important and crucial. Whereas 40k is much more like, movement's important, but I don't know. It just feels like it's still, its heart is more shooty, it's more combat focused, whether that's shooting or close combat. I'm sure other 40k players will disagree.
I was going to say, I think there's probably a bunch of 40k players listening to that going, no, Phil.
It is also movement based, but not as much as AoS. AoS feels way more movement focused.
I have no basis for comparison, but you're wrong.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm joking. I think, I agree with you. But, just for the sake of not being chewed out by 40k players, I will play the devil's advocate and be like, yes.
No, that's true. But here's the thing. I sort of feel like in 40k, if you don't have the sort of pie plate objective markers, there's normally only a handful of models on there that you can easily measure. And that will be, or to me, that just feels much more intuitive to do there than it is in AoS, where it feels like the model count's a lot higher. Although actually, ironically, the model count isn't as high, because as we talked about loads, 40k tends to have almost double the models, but I think AoS has more like horde units, is the way I would describe it, on an objective versus 40k. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking at my nostrils. But yeah, I feel like in AoS and I think maybe this is in part because we've come to the game quite late. So things like flat mats and objective markers were very established into AoS by the time we got into it. And because it's a new game, I'm sort of much more willing to accept these things. Whereas a 40k player that's old and grumpy, I resist change at all possible moments, and grumble as much as possible whenever something has changed in my game, because it's obviously for the worse and not for the better. I think that's, but in AoS I can just, go, cool, I've accepted the fate of the new edition. This is what it is. Great.
I agree with that, though. I think 100% correct. I think AoS feels like a game that's been built with all of those things in mind, whereas 40k always feels like it's fighting against it a bit. But ultimately, it's a much of a muchness conversation, but I think you are right in the sense that I think you're right in the sense that it is like that. But well, there we go. A lovely little intro there, or outro, sorry. Thanks for checking out episode 197. 3 more, Phil. We've done 200 of these. Imagine.
Is there going to be cake?
I hope so. I need to find the motivation to do it. Or
just buy some,
lean on you to do it instead. But yeah, no, we definitely shouldn't we actually try and do something of significance for the children?
Should we do a quiz? Because we didn't do the Christmas one, we could do a quiz. We could just meet up and play games with everyone.
Yeah, this definitely feels like it's a significant milestone. I mean, it's taken us many years and much effort to get there. 6?
Is it something like that? It feels like it's 6.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think, like 200 episodes is pretty meaningful. Maybe, let's put it out there and see what people think. Because I'd like to involve the listeners. We've been really blessed to have some really great long-time listeners.
They can come along and have cake as well.
Cake.
Yeah, cake and games.
Could you imagine how miserably, weirdly depressing it'll be if it's just you and me sat somewhere by ourselves crying into our cake.
I
because no one
mean,
wants to come.
that's normal, right?
That is normal, to be fair. And to be fair, we'd have cake at least, so it wouldn't be too bad.
That's true. I didn't even get cake for my birthday this year.
Well, it's because, you don't deserve it.
Exactly.
Who didn't get you cake?
Everyone.
Oh, yeah, true. I suppose I failed on that note. I did offer to buy you Valdor, but you didn't want him.
No, well, he's not edible.
Well, he is, but in the worst kind of way.
Toxic.
Yeah, very toxic. Don't be eating Valdor. Either, the real life one, not that that's even possible, but you know what I mean. Neither are good. Anyway, yeah, so 200 episodes coming up, which is pretty mad. And honestly, can't believe that we made it this far because sincerely, when you enter into these kind of projects, you don't really assume that you're going to get past, the first couple. But yeah, somehow we've stuck to it. So yeah, excited to get to 200. So yeah, literally 2 more and then it's it, isn't it? Flipping heck. God, that's wild. All right, well, yeah, we'll have to have a proper think about that. Reignite the social medias. Do something.
Exactly. See what people say.
Go grovelling to people. Come join us at the thing. I mean, we could host an event of sorts, couldn't we? I mean, it'd be a bit of a mad dash, but we could do it. I don't really want to, though, but we could.
Well, the easiest thing would be we're just going to somewhere like Bad Moon in London, which is open to the public, and if people want to come down, they can just appear.
That's fair. Low key.
Exactly.
We could sit there by the door, presuming every person that comes in looking at them like.
Well, yeah, we'll have party hats on and we'll shake everyone's hand as they come in.
That's it. Although, could you imagine the inverse, that we have a massive turnout and hundreds of people come down and it's this ridiculous thing?
No, because it won't happen.
No, I agree. I mean, but now that
5 people tops is what I would call it.
That's the power of our podcast. That's what we can draw.
Exactly. In that region, at least.
There you go. All right, let's put some work into that, Phil. Let's workshop that. Let's offline it. Let's get that done.
Fair.
All right. Well, anyway, love you all. Thanks for listening. Cheers and everything. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.